Chapter 1138. Actually, worryless thoughts were not unreasonable. Worryless existence was related to whether or not King Wei would be able to return in one piece. Thus, when the battle began, this battlefield attracted the attention of countless important figures in the space-time corridor. The heaven-deceiving king was the most powerful person in the space-time corridor, and he was at the same level as Princess Royal Feng Jianghu. This was the rear of the space-time corridor, surrounded by Miracle City, and there was also a sword array set up by the three most powerful people of the neutral camp. Under such circumstances, it was undoubtedly the most suitable to have a ruler here. Even if the peak experts of the Order or Shadow Camp could bypass the front line of the space-time corridor and launch a surprise attack on the spinning galaxy, a ruler would be able to deal with them. Even if the ruler failed, he could still deceive the distance between the stars in an instant, causing the sword array outside Miracle City to appear in front of him in an instant, destroying everything in his way. At the same time, he could also let the strongest experts of the three camps receive the news. The Heaven Deceiver wanted to intervene right from the start of the battle. The spiraling galaxy was a medium to large-sized star region, and it was quite far away. However, apostles could teleport over extremely long distances, and as a ruler, he could also manipulate distance, turning trillions of light-years into a few steps, and thus directly entering the battlefield. However, just as he moved, he was stopped. The order came from His Majesty of the Space-Time Corridor, Great Emperor Xianxia. The Great Emperor didn't explain the reason. Instead, he projected a consciousness next to him and watched the battle silently. The King of Deception had no idea what the Great Monarch was waiting for, so he could only suppress his anxiety. The King of Deception had a lot of complaints about the young men attacking Worryless after a brief discussion. He wanted to complain, but he couldn't. After all, Worryless was a part of King Wei and half of His Majesty's divine form. No matter how weak Worryless' condition was, Worryless was not someone they could deal with. If they were in the God of War's realm, it wouldn't be so bad. After all, the headquarters of the Peak Apostles was in the God of War's realm. However, they were in the space-time corridor, and the Apostles' combat power was limited. In King of Deception's eyes, they had no chance of success. It was the same during the battle. They might have caused some trouble for Wuyu. However, the entire battle could be said to be completely one-sided. Sword chi that surpassed the speed of light. The Chaos Sea. Catastrophe. The scene that had been separated from the starry sky for a long time once again appeared under the starry sky. The King of Deception was excited, but at the same time, worried. Then he saw the predator. This is Heaven-Deceiving King's pupils constricted. This divine form. The divine form Nemesis. The light of the sword was imprinted in his eyes, and it was replayed thousands of times in an instant. Familiar. It was incomparably familiar. Unfamiliar. It was also incomparably unfamiliar. The Heaven-Deceiving King was a little confused. He was sure that he had seen this sword before, or a sword similar to it, but he couldn't remember what it meant. That familiar feeling was too faint. And that unfamiliar feeling was incomparably strong. The Heaven-Deceiving King hesitated for a moment before asking, "Who is he?" Of course, he was referring to Lin Shi. In the War God realm, Lin Shi was almost universally recognized as the successor of the War God. He could even be said to be the crown prince of the War God realm. Although the War God rarely mentioned this identity in recent years, Lin Shi was still dazzling enough. However, as the 11th prince, who had once been favored by the God of War, Lin Shi kept a low profile most of the time and rarely appeared in public. The people in the space-time corridor knew very little about him, and they had never seen him fight. But looking at the godly figure before him, looking at that sword, the King of Deception was getting more and more dazed. He hesitated for a moment and asked again, "Your Majesty, is Lin Shi really the son of the War God?" In terms of blood relations, yes. The projection of the Great Emperor was shrouded in golden light. His voice was extremely calm. In terms of blood relations, yes. Then what about the real relationship? The Heaven-Deceiving King wanted to ask more. The Great Emperor suddenly sighed and smiled. "You guys are really good at hiding things. If I hadn't been watching this sword, even if I knew there was something wrong with Lin Shi, I wouldn't have thought he was." The Great Emperor paused and shook his head. Time was meaningless. Only a few minutes had passed on the battlefield, but a few days had passed here. On the battlefield, Worryless stood quietly. Lin Shi and Wuxiang had both died. The Great Emperor had been extremely calm the whole time, waiting quietly. It wasn't until he sighed that two ink-black light spots quietly appeared beside the great emperor. The light spots kept expanding and shrinking, and once again became two extremely blurry remote projections. The heaven-deceiving king narrowed his eyes, smiled and said calmly, "Your Majesties, the human sovereign of the human palace, the war god of the war god realm." The moment the two of them appeared, the heaven-deceiving king seemed to have completely forgotten that Xianyuan Wuxiang and Lin Shi had died. He was completely calm. "When did you find out?" The black figure slightly twisted. The remote projection of the human emperor spoke slowly. His voice was calm and ethereal, as if it had passed through endless time and space, with a sense of unreality. The two deep black projections formed a blurry figure on the left and right sides of the great emperor. "Very early," the great emperor said calmly. "When I first saw him, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what was wrong. This state of his is no longer a return, but a complete rebirth. I should have found out long ago, but you hit him too deeply. Shouldn't you explain this matter?" "What explanation do you want?" The voice of the war god, who was fighting in the corridor of time and space, was clear and tough. The great Emperor Xianyuan was silent for a moment. Then he said calmly, "Is it because you don't trust me? Or because you don't trust His Majesty? Or because you don't trust the entire corridor of time and space?" "His Majesty Huangshi is coming back," the war god said calmly. 11 is my son, of course I have to hide him well. Who knows what His Majesty's attitude is? Or do you hope that when he comes back, the war god's realm will break with the corridor of time and space?" The great Emperor Xianyuan smiled, and his voice was a little bitter. "I don't remember clearly what happened in the past, but His Majesty Li Tianlan also regrets it. But you should know his character indirectly. Even if he regrets, he won't admit it." The war god and the human emperor didn't speak. The first His Majesty was in charge of the human clan and the entire neutral camp. Not to mention at that time, even now with his strength, he could be said to be the well-deserved #1 expert of the neutral camp. At the same time, he was also a rare tyrant. No one could deny his achievements, but his mistakes could not be covered up either. Lin Shi could be said to be the biggest mistake that His Majesty made since he took control of the human clan. Whether it was Huang Shi or Li Tianlan. In the beginning, the great Emperor Xianyuan could be said to be the first His Majesty's student. And Lin Shi's predecessor could be said to be the great Emperor Xuanyuan's junior brother. The two of them were the most likely to take over that His Majesty's authority. If the Order Camp didn't sow discord, today's corridor of time and space might be different. The Order Camp's method was simple yet not simple. They used the tactic of sowing discord that had happened countless times in the history of the human clan. But the other party did it very cleverly, and all the details seemed almost flawless at that time. At that time, all the evidence seemed to indicate that the great Emperor Xuanyuan's junior brother wanted to blaspheme his master's wife. That was the first His Majesty's wife, the current Qin Weibai. But in fact, the great Emperor Xianyuan knew very well that the little junior brother fell in love with the first His Majesty's daughter. That was the current Feng Qinggu. The Order Camp successfully understood the relationship between the master and the disciple. In the beginning, His Majesty didn't fall for the trap, but some grudges were inevitable. Feeling the alienation from his teacher and the strange gazes from all sides, little junior brother's fate was inadvertently changed by the Order faction's strongest individual in his despair. That was why he did the most foolish thing in his life. In order to prove his innocence, he borrowed a sword from the great Emperor Xianyuan. With that sword as the edge and the infinite destiny of the human clan as the light, the endless sharp edge injured Qin Weibai in an instant from an extremely far distance. Now, it was already impossible to understand how all this happened, let alone how seriously injuring Qin Weibai could prove his innocence. Maybe the situation developed like this at that time, or maybe the fate node was changed. The process was vague, but in fact, it was no longer important. The important thing was the consequences. Qin Weibai's daughter, Feng Qinggu, bewitched the little junior brother with a doppelganger. He might have seen through the doppelganger long ago, but he didn't care. Instead, he cherished it very much. Only a few people knew that the person he really fell in love with was Feng Qinggu. Even if it was just a doppelganger, he was addicted to it and couldn't extricate himself. That doppelganger was now a household name in the history of Miracle City, and its real name was Enchantress. She was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a country and bring disaster to the people. Everything happened naturally and smoothly. At that time, the little junior brother, who controlled the human clan of Miracle City, could be said to be obedient to Feng Qingwu's enchantress doppelganger, and he couldn't allow her to suffer any grievances. Killing the officials, imposing torture, desolate silver. During that time, the destiny of the human clan rapidly flowed away and shifted to other human clans. The Order Camp took advantage of the situation and changed the fate of the entire Miracle City, transforming the destiny of the human clan into destiny, and then used eternal life as a temptation, causing internal strife within the human clan of Miracle City. The influence of the civil strife continued to increase, and finally affected the entire neutral camp. Chaos suddenly arose, and there was a lot of disturbance. It was a chaotic, short, and extremely long period of time. When the first His Majesty realized everything, the big mistake had already been made. He personally took action and killed the little junior brother with a sword, but in the face of chaos, he was already powerless. The Miracle City changed owners. A large number of human clan experts were branded with the mark of order, and then joined the Order Camp, completely betraying the neutral camp. The first His Majesty invited the human clan of the universe to station in the west of Miracle City to stabilize the situation. In order to recapture Miracle City, he fought with countless peak experts of the Order Camp. The destiny of the human clan of Miracle City was exhausted, and the destiny of the Order Camp also began to fall apart. The neutral camp finally recaptured Miracle City, but the seriously injured His Majesty was no longer able to gather the destiny of the human clan. The internal injuries continued to accumulate. In the following years, His Majesty took action many times, and finally fell under the siege. Qin Wei Bai left with him. The authority was concentrated on Great Emperor Xianyuan. Great Emperor Xianyuan moved Miracle City, and in order to erase the destiny left by the Order Camp, he used sword energy to seal the time and space around Miracle City. It was not until a few hundred years ago in real time that the so-called destiny of Miracle City completely dissipated, and the destiny of the human clan began to return. Great Emperor Xuanyuan's thoughts were a little absent-minded, and he muttered to himself, "I regret that I should have. This matter is a misunderstanding, and now, you should be clear that this has long become a taboo. You can rest assured that even if His Majesty returns, he will not pursue this matter. It was originally a plot by the Order Camp to sow discord, and there is no need to pursue it." After a pause, he smiled and said, "And the ill-fated relationship between the little junior brother and Qinggu must have been enough to give His Majesty a headache." "I know." God of War was silent for a while. "That's why I arranged for him to go to Miracle City." "You mean?" Great Emperor's tone was slightly raised. "His return this time is purely instinctive. At this point, it can be considered a complete failure. The sword of the natural enemy has become a divine form, which will greatly limit his future development. He can't care about the fate with Feng Qinggu now, and he needs to start again. In fact, the failure of his return is not a surprise, but the most important thing is that his failure is too ridiculous. I suspect that this should have something to do with Her Majesty Huangshi personally killing him back then. His soul is stained with the real mark of Her Majesty, and that divine form. 9 deaths. Great Emperor's voice was calm. Back then, the little junior brother was killed by the divine form 9 deaths. To some extent, he witnessed it with his own eyes, and wanted to stop it, but was unable to do so. So start again, let His Majesty end him again, and then return again. God of War said. That's good. The Great Emperor pondered for a moment before nodding. You seem to have forgotten that Lin Shi is already dead, and there is no chance for him to be resurrected. The heaven-deceiving king suddenly reminded with a chuckle. He, who had been silent, finally confirmed Lin Shi's identity. After confirming Lin Shi's identity, he naturally knew why he was so familiar with that divine form. The divine form natural enemy. This sword was the one he had used to severely injure Qin Wei Bai. What is life and death? God of War asked indifferently. King of Deception snorted and said calmly, "If you want to do it, then hurry up. A long night is fraught with trouble, and King Wei should be more complete now." "I'm here, so there is no such thing as a long night is fraught with trouble." Human Emperor's calm voice sounded. His sight crossed the endless distance and fell on the battlefield where only Worryless was left. In an instant, he had seen Worryless state clearly. "I'm curious about what he's thinking now," God of War suddenly said. "He wants freedom." Great Emperor Xianyuan said slowly, "He is different from the polluted Worryless. Worryless is the core. After being polluted, his position is equivalent to betrayal. This kind of betrayal is unconscious. He instinctively refuses to merge with the body, and even wants to devour the body. If he can succeed, then King Wei will join the shadow camp. Worryless is more complicated. To some extent, he is the combination of His Majesty's figure, his long-term negative emotions, deep memories, and part of energy. With that divine form, there is no possibility of him being polluted, but the negative emotions accumulated in King Wei's long life will affect him and make him instinctively avoid responsibility. He won't betray, but he doesn't want to carry anything. All he wants is freedom. Now, we dare not let Wuqing and Worryless merge. Wuqing's loyalty to His Majesty is instinctive, but none of us dare to underestimate the shadow camp. Therefore, the most correct way is to let Worryless and Wuqing merge first. Let Wuqing digest the negative emotions that belong to him. That way, after the body and the divine form merge, Wuqing won't be afraid of being polluted. Then, when Worryless fuses, the divine form will turn the pollution of the shadow camp into pure nothingness. When King Wei's body becomes complete, that is the real period of cultivation, and also the starting point of his return. God of War nodded. Then let's begin. Without a sound, God of War's projection disappeared. With a flash of golden light, Great Emperor Xianyuan left the spinning galaxy. Human Emperor's projection directly dissipated and returned to another time and space. King of Deception was still watching the battlefield quietly. He saw Worryless on the battlefield and suddenly looked up at the dead void around him. His body tensed up as if he had encountered a great threat, with indescribable anger. In silence, the void around the battlefield suddenly began to twist. The rule of space was changed beyond recognition by the mighty sword intent. The twisted space began to shatter without a sound. Worryless raised his hand. The sword light burst out from his hand, extremely dazzling. It was a beautiful scene. Because it was slow. Too slow. The sword light in his hand slowly bloomed in an almost frozen state. That was actually still extremely fast. But as the void shattered, the rule of time on the battlefield also changed beyond recognition. King of Deception watched quietly. He could feel the vast sharpness that had suddenly appeared in the silent void. It was dark, deep, and boundless. That was the sword light that burst out to the extreme. That was a sword that directly tore through time and space from an endless distance. That was the sword of Human Emperor. The sword light rushed out from another time and space, endless and perfect. Time and space completely surrendered to the will of the sword light. So the broken time began to reassemble. Time began to change. Worryless took a step back. He retracted his raised hand. Then Worryless took another step back. The sword light suddenly appeared around him and was all compressed back into his energy body. The natural enemy of the divine form began to appear. The huge mechanical sword gradually became clear. The sword edge was pulled out from Worryless' energy body bit by bit. The divine form was completely clear. Lin Shi's figure was outlined bit by bit from the void, then quickly retreated. The dark sword energy on the mechanical sword was extinguished. The huge sword turned into a finger. The finger began to touch the necklace. The sea of chaos that could turn everything into nothingness appeared again. The outline of the mechanical giant became clear. It seemed to be boundless and crazy, shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. The mechanical giant disintegrated again. The endless mechanical army that covered the starry sky began to appear. The sea of chaos disappeared. The mechanical army began to retreat. Then formed a huge metal planet. The metal planet disintegrated and once again turned into a mechanical army that covered the sky. Endless flames and sword lights suddenly lit up, but they did not collide. Instead, they kept retreating in the direction from which they came. The shadow of the metal planet began to appear. The mechanical army all entered the shadow of the planet. The apostle snapped his fingers. Worryless' figure kept moving and finally moved to a distant place. A large amount of space dust began to float on the battlefield. The apostle's first voice resounded in the void. This was the beginning of the battle, and also the end of the battle. War God Realm's Great General Wei, Duke Wei, Apostle Lin Wuxiang, greets Your Highness King Wei. Everything stopped. Time and space became stable again. Lin Shi, Shenyuan Wuxiang, Apostle, Saint, Xingtian. Everyone stood under the starry sky again. Everyone had returned to their peak state before the battle began. Except for Worryless. Right now, he was still in the weakest state after the battle. In that vast black sword light, time and space became an individual, constantly flowing backward, interfering with the individual but not the reality. Now that they were at their peak, facing a weak Worryless who had not even reached the 5th level of authority, there was no need to continue the battle. This was not resurrection. It was time backtracking on an individual level. To be more precise, this was a reincarnation. Chapter 1139. Time was meaningless. A few minutes had passed on the battlefield at the edge of the rotating Milky Way. A few years had passed in the Hall of the King of Deception in the center of the Milky Way, but only a few seconds had passed in the real time of Miracle City. Li Tianlan slowly breathed out. In his perception, Ruthless stood quietly in the lounge of the interrogation room, confused, quiet, and silent, like a statue. Zhou Mulin had taken out his mobile phone and was ready to call the emergency number. The interrogation that lasted for a day was interrupted by Li Tianlan's abnormality at the most critical moment. Although he said that he was fine, no one thought that bleeding from the 7 apertures was the so-called fine. Li Tianlan must not die. This was the consensus of Jianghu state. Everyone was afraid of him, but they had to rely on him to balance the situation of Jianghu state and even the entire dark world. Except for extreme cases like Chen Fengqing, there were few high-level people in Jianghu state who wanted to kill Li Tianlan. Now Gua Wentian might be half of them, but most people agreed with Li Huaqing's idea. Li Tianlan could have his own forces and groups, but everything about him must be contained to a certain extent, so that Li Tianlan and Jianghu state could achieve a so-called win-win situation. Li Huaqing did not mind giving Li Tianlan great power and benefits, but the premise was that Li Tianlan should really become a part of Jianghu state. Perhaps the miserable end of the Li family had long been deep in Li Tianlan's soul, so what Li Huaqing hoped was not what Li Tianlan wanted. He wanted to become another Wang family of Beihai, which was beneficial to Jianghu state, but maintained a high degree of autonomy. He could keep in line with Jianghu state in terms of position, but to be more precise, the relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Jianghu state should be more cooperative than subordinate. All the contradictions between Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing were the collision of these two ideas. This did not seem to be a big difference, but at some subtle moments, it could play a decisive role. Not to mention anything else, more than 20 years ago, if it was the Wang family of Beihai that suffered a catastrophe instead of the Li family, everything the Wang family of Beihai had suffered would definitely be countless times better than the Li family. What the Li family had encountered was not the most miserable. After all, Li Honghe was still alive, so the Li family still had its afterglow. And if this thing happened to the Wang family of Beihai, their worst ending was that the Beihai core and the supreme power of Beihai province would change hands. The Wang family of Beihai would still be the top wealthy family in Jianghu state and even in the world. Blood mixed with cold water droplets flowed down from his fingers. Li Tianlan leaned back on the rocking chair in the shadow again. The chair shook slightly. Li Tianlan glanced at Gu Xianyan, who was standing in the center of the conference room, and said in a steady voice, "Go on." There was a brief silence in the conference room. In the conference room, the girl, who was still a little childish but vaguely had a peerless elegance, cast a curious glance in Li Tianlan's direction. Regardless of the psychological activities of the giants present, she went on directly. As a student that Gu Xingyun had devoted countless efforts to in the past few years, what Gu Xianyan displayed was an absolutely complete and authentic Phoenix Pavilion. Even the dark side of the entire Kunlun city. The conference room was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Every big shot's expression gradually became gloomy. In the almost frozen atmosphere, only the girl's crisp and cold voice continued to speak. The rocking chair swayed slightly. Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to lose focus. Gu Xianyan's voice sounded intermittently in his consciousness. All of his attention was focused on the nearby Wu Qing. The virtual light blue line continued to extend on the edge of worry-free heights. In silence, Lin Shi, Shenyuan Wushang, Xing Tian, and Saint reappeared on the edge of worry-free heights. The real body of the apostle stood there silently. Looking at the people who appeared beside him, he fell into silence for a while. "It's terrible." After nearly half a minute, the apostle sighed softly. "If it weren't for His Majesty, even if my real body came to the battlefield, I wouldn't be able to take down worry-free. One of the strongest combat forces of the human clan. Even if it's only a weak part, it's not easy to take down," Shenyuan Wushang said in a flat voice.
His hands were folded together, and he was holding an extremely dazzling particle of light in an extremely solemn manner.
The light particle was very small. If the surrounding light source was removed, its volume could even be said to be non-existent. It rotated unhurriedly on Shenyuan Wuxiang's palm, emitting a colorful halo, charming and gorgeous. The traces of the void began to fade gradually. The real environment enveloped them. The light particle was immediately affected.
The colorful halo began to gradually fade, and the light particle itself began to gradually grow larger and larger.
In just a few dozen seconds, a fist-sized stone appeared in Shenyuan Wuxiang's hand. The multicolored light glimmered faintly on the stone. The apostle only gave it a single look, yet a large amount of information was already directly transmitted into his brain, the countless scenes directly stirring up a violent storm in the depths of his mind. The apostle closed his eyes, releasing a muffled groan, 2 streaks of blood directly flowing out from his eyes. Shenyuan Wuxiang glanced at him, somewhat admiring him. Worry-free has already recovered to the most primitive state, which is that half-divine form with countless negative emotions.
You actually dare to look directly at it.
Amazing.
The corners of the apostle's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything.
Shenyuan Wuxiang didn't notice that when he spoke, Lin Shi was also looking directly at the multicolored stone in his hand. His double pupils continuously opened and closed in his eyes. His body trembled a little, but he wasn't injured. I was fortunate to see a part of King Wei's real body. It can be considered a worthwhile trip. Lin Shi said softly, his tone somewhat complicated. This was the first of the 4 great divine weapons of the neutral camp. 3 of the 4 most powerful divine weapons of the neutral camp, if King Wei wasn't included, were in the space-time corridor. This was the foundation of the space-time corridor. This kind of foundation was worthy of the title of the beginning of the human race. The 4th, which was also the first, was now also beginning to return. King Wei, the 1,000-world map, the human emperor tower, and the Shenyuan sword. These were the 4 great divine weapons that everyone in the neutral camp was familiar with. But in the world, in the major camps, they had a different name. The sky-mending stone, the 1,000-world map, the human emperor tower, and the Shenyuan sword. There's no need to delay. Worry-free's consciousness has temporarily returned to nothingness. Right now, we need to quickly fuse Worry-free with King Wei's body. Shenyuan Wuxiang looked at Lin Shi. Do you want to watch from the side? No, I can watch from here. Lin Shi shook his head. The apostle's fingers moved slightly, and the figures of Shenyuan Wuxiang and Xing Tian immediately became illusory. The illusory lines spread at the speed of light, and the passage of data directly spread to Serenity Prefecture. The stone in Shenyuan Wuxiang's hand turned into data and instantly disappeared. Chapter 1140. His vision blurred for only a moment. But his body had already crossed thousands of miles. In the completely virtualized hotel room, a large amount of messy data kept combining and quickly formed the bodies of Shenyuan Wuxiang and Xing Tian. The colorful sky-mending stone glowed in his hand. The glimmer seeped out of the hotel room. The light waves formed subtle radiation, constantly spreading in Yuzhou City, forming a special frequency that could not be sensed by any instrument. Shenyuan Wuxiang held the stone solemnly and stood in front of the French window of the hotel with a solemn face. He did not dare to look directly at the sky-mending stone with a lot of negative emotions in his hand. In the corner of his eye, under the colorful light, the fist-sized stone seemed to gradually become transparent. Images with different emotions flickered thousands of times in a second. If one didn't have a special reason or didn't reach the pinnacle level, one's brain would be crushed by the countless images contained in it after a short period of time. Wu Yu's will had disappeared, and the level of the sky-mending stone had returned to the highest level. The colorful light constantly fluctuated in all directions of Yuzhou. Wu Yu's will had been obliterated. The consciousness of the sky-mending stone, which carried half of the divine form and negative emotions, was extremely simple. It felt the existence of the body and instinctively wanted to merge with it. Shenyuan Wuxiang held the stone and waited silently. Your Highness. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes and suddenly called out. Shenyuan Wuxiang did not move and said calmly, Speak. If King Wei has this divine form, will he be able to find Jianghu without His Majesty's special vision? Xing Tian asked slowly. There were not many records about the divine form catastrophe in the corridor of time and space.
The existence of the chaotic sea was one of the few materials about it. It was said that Her Majesty Xianxia faced the end of the order camp before she reached the peak. In a desperate situation, she condensed the last divine form and became the first god of slaughter of the neutral camp. Under the starry sky, the real peak end of the world could restrain everything, especially martial arts. The catastrophe that Her Majesty Xianxia condensed in the most desperate and dangerous situation could restrain the end of the world. This could be seen from the battle between Wu Yu and the Apostle. The existence of the catastrophe had also directly established the path of all warriors in the future. Today's war god, today's Ran Huang, today's martial emperor, today's peak of all martial arts levels, were all affected by this train of thought. In Her Majesty Huangxi's body, the final catastrophe that condensed might not be the strongest, but it was the most crucial. It was the foundation and pillar of martial arts authority, and also Her Majesty Huangxi's killing intent and hostility. The hostility and murderous intent towards order and the shadow. Right now, the heaven-mending stone state was not complete, and its divine form was only half complete. However, the essence of its existence would not change at all. This was still the emperor's killing intent and hostility. If King Wei successfully merged with the divine stone and used the hostility of the divine form, it was entirely possible for him to directly locate Jianghu. What else? Shenyuan Wuxiang looked at Xing Tian in confusion. Why do you think we spent so much effort to erase Wu You's will? It's important for King Wei to be whole again, but finding that hidden rat is even more important. Should we go watch the battle? Xing Tian asked directly. Shenyuan Wuxiang thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, we'll stay here. But we can't be sure what state King Wei will be after the fusion. Xing Tian frowned. Of course, it's the true state of Miracle City. Shenyuan Wuxiang's voice was calm and indifferent. Are you sure, Your Highness? Xing Tian's tone became more and more hesitant. Of course. Shenyuan Wuxiang smiled. In fact, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we can be sure of the state of Jianghu, or the thing in Jianghu. It can silently pollute the core of King Wei. Needless to say, it must be at the peak level. Standing at that height, even if it was seriously injured and dying, as long as it still had a trace of consciousness, it could easily destroy Miracle City. Father has hidden Miracle City for so many years, and Order and the Shadow have been searching for its location. That thing is now in Miracle City. If it could take action, there would be no need for us to do anything now. There are only two possibilities for its state. First, it's unconscious. It can only affect a small number of people or things around it with some of its aura. This is also the state we are most worried about. If it's in this state, if we take action on the battlefield, it will be easy to wake it up. At that time, our authority will directly become nutrients for it to wake up. Second, it's in an irregular state of chaos. It can also affect people or things around it with its aura, but it won't have a clear consciousness. Its target and environment are completely random. In this state, we can't do anything when we arrive at the scene. It won't be hurt at all. Its only fear is reality. This is something we don't have. King Wei's true state can hurt it to a certain extent. If we add Big Brother, we may even directly kill it. And given the strength of King Wei's true state, no matter what state it is in, it can't attract its attention. When we are asleep, we won't notice a few particles of dust floating in the air. No matter how loud they are, it doesn't mean anything to us. Similarly, when we are in a state of chaos, we won't pay attention to what makes a certain particle of dust in the air different. We are dust, so is King Wei, and so is Jianghu. If King Wei can kill Jianghu, the thing on Jianghu will be exposed as soon as possible. At that time, he will be greeted by the sword formation set up by the three supreme masters of the neutral camp in the outer space of Miracle City. No matter what state he is in, he can only die. We can solve all the trouble once and for all. What if Jianghu doesn't die? Xing Tian asked in a low voice. This possibility was real, because no one knew what the top masters of the shadow camp behind him had done unconsciously. If Jianghu doesn't die, it won't disturb that thing in a special state. If we can't kill him this time, we can kill him next time. Xing Tian stood where he was and was silent for a long time.
We can't do anything.
Shenyuan Wuxiang held the stone in his hand and let the light spread in his palm.
The only thing we can do is to make King Wei complete. That's all. Xing Tian still didn't speak. No one was sure what was in Jiang Shangyu's body. The shadow camp was in an irregular state of chaos everywhere. Among the three camps, they had the least authority. The shadow camp had only one authority. But their authority was also the most comprehensive. It belonged to the shadow camp. It was called Unknown. Chapter 1141. No matter what. This is a very good opportunity. Shenyuan Wuxiang was silent for a long time before he said softly, "After all, Jiang Shangyu is a big problem. Whether it's from Big Brother's standpoint or the Miracle City's standpoint, he must die." Jiang Shangyu's current level was not high. He had come to the space-time corridor spacetime from the War God realm with the Chaos Authority. But his consciousness was always clear. This meant that he had not completely become a shadow creature. But his existence had always been a thorn in the side of the space-time corridor and the War God realm. Even the three majesties who stood at the peak did not ignore his existence. He had always been in the Miracle City. And they could not be sure what state the thing on Jiang Shangyu was in. If it were not for this, the space-time corridor and the War God realm would have personally come out to end Jiang Shangyu. The space-time corridor's eldest princess Feng Qinggu, who had arrived almost at the same time as Lin Shi, might have taken on this mission to some extent. It was just that there was no good opportunity and a lot of uncertainty, so she did not dare to act rashly. King Wei's fusion was indeed a good opportunity. Ruthlessness and carefree merged into one. Although the core was missing, it was enough to reach the strongest state he had ever been in. In this state, Ruthlessness's energy would completely return to its peak state. Its explosive power could be extremely close to the sword of eternity that had appeared in the sky above Mormons a few years ago, or it could be completely equal to the power of that sword. The so-called surpassing was no longer possible. In the Miracle City, that sword was already the limit of combat power, and it was also the strongest sword light in the real environment. It was impossible to break this limit, even if the power surpassed that sword by a little bit. Of course, the theoretical possibility did exist. First of all, one had to be completely real and have an absolutely clear state of reality. One could get rid of the influence of the real environment in the most realistic environment, and then break through the sword formation of the Miracle City that the three supreme masters of the neutral camp had imprisoned. At the cost of one's own vitality, one could break the limit of reality and surpass that sword light. There were countless possible consequences, but most of them were not good. In this way, rather than saying that one had broken the limit of reality, it was better to say that one used the planet in the real environment as a sword to reconstruct reality. 99% of the results were failure. Even if one succeeded, the Miracle City would be reduced to ashes. Therefore, Mormon's Sword of Eternity was the top single-target lethality in the real environment. Even if the god of battle and the great monarchs were to descend in person, that would be the extent of their destructive power. Unless they're not there. He cared about his own safety and didn't care about Miracle City's safety. This was also the reason why the entire neutral camp was extremely afraid of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu's body was very likely to be an unknown. The biggest difference between the Shadow faction and the other factions was that they had the highest authority in the faction. All living beings were ants with authority. The unknowns could be said to be the strongest in the Shadow faction. There was no way to guess their combat power. Perhaps in 1 second, the unknowns could surpass all the strongest in the Order faction and the Neutral faction, or even Her Majesty Huang Shi. However, in the next second, they could become the weakest Shadow faction. The key to this huge change was the state of chaos. None of the peak experts in the Shadow faction were eternal. The unconscious slumber and the irregular chaos were going on all the time. No one could understand the Shadow faction, including the Shadow faction itself. Sometimes they were the strongest faction, and sometimes they were the weakest. The Space-Time Cloister and the Order faction still didn't know how many unknowns there were in the Shadow faction. Because of the state of chaos. The Space-Time Cloister had never stopped researching the Shadow faction, but there were countless hypotheses, but there was no strong evidence to prove anything. In the information that Shenyuan Wuxiang had, he could only confirm a small amount of information. It was impossible for every unknowns to always be in their peak state. It could be confirmed. The duration of every unknown's peak state wasn't the same. It could be as long as 10,000 years, or as short as a second. It could be confirmed. Every unknowns would fall into a weak state in the state of chaos. The time was random. It could be confirmed. The Shadow faction's authority was above everything else. Doubts. After the unknowns fell into a weak state,
the Shadow faction's high-level battle strength wouldn't change. Doubts. After the unknowns fell into a weak state, their authority would be randomly transferred to other individuals. Doubts. There were many combinations of unknowns' abilities. Countless combinations would constantly increase or decrease, chaotic and disorderly. Doubts. There were many unknowns in the Shadow faction. Doubts. There was only one unknowns in the Shadow faction. Doubts. There were no real living beings in the Shadow faction, no real authority, no specific abilities. Authority was the essence, and the essence wouldn't change. In the current situation, there were doubts about some research on the Shadow faction, but this theory hadn't been completely eliminated. This meant that these things might be true, but they weren't certain. It was because of this uncertainty, but it might be true, that the entire neutral faction was extremely afraid when facing the unknowns, especially when facing the unknowns in Miracle City. If the Shadow faction's authority was the essence and didn't change, then it meant that the thing on Xianxia's body at this time was at the peak level, but its essence might just be the lowest level of shadow. The reason why it was powerful was because of the more essential authority. In this state, it wasn't the shadow creature controlling the authority, but the authority controlling the shadow creature. It was just a simple carrier. Once he woke up and discovered that this was Miracle City, he could completely sacrifice the life of the carrier to destroy the city. Even if he couldn't completely destroy the city under the sword formation of the three neutral factions' most powerful beings, he could easily bring an unimaginable calamity to the entire Miracle City that would spread across the entire world. And the authority itself could completely rely on the state of chaos to transfer itself to another random shadow creature in another place. In this way, it would have almost no losses. Instead, it might directly become more powerful. It concerned the entire Miracle City, and no one dared to gamble. The only way was to make Jianghu dissipate in the very short time when that thing was separated from Jianghu at the moment of his death before he could react. Whether the other party was unconscious in a state of deep sleep or in a state of chaos without rules, there was a flaw in the moment it separated from Jianghu. This flaw existed for a very short period of time. It was even less than 1/10,000th of a second. But this was the only way to deal with it. The great emperor of the space-time cloister and the god of war realm were now fighting. This task undoubtedly fell on the human emperor of the imperial palace. He was also the most suitable person for this task. His reincarnation could undoubtedly increase the error tolerance of this operation. Shenyuan Wuxiang didn't know where he was now, but he was sure that His Majesty's gaze was locked on this place at this time, and he could arrive at any time. The colorful eyes of the sky-mending stone spread out. Shenyuan Wuxiang's eyes quietly became extremely dignified. Only those who knew the inside story could understand how crucial Prince Wei's operation was this time. This battle not only concerned the safety of Miracle City, but also whether His Majesty Li Tianlan could return smoothly. Chapter 1142. Returning was never a simple matter. The higher the level, the greater the danger. Of course, if the level was too low, there was no possibility of returning. The current research results of the time corridor showed that the closer to the peak, the greater the possibility of returning. The core problem here was the ego. To be precise, it was self-awareness. The time corridor had been rebooted countless times. The remnant soul of His Majesty the Emperor personally walked into the world's end. Then it was the King of Guards. Then there were several natural restarts. Returning wasn't a strange thing for most bystanders. But returning was extremely familiar and strange to the returnees. At present, no one could accurately describe the specific nature of returning. It couldn't be said to be a previous life or a reincarnation. To be precise, it should be a certain degree of remodeling. The returnees were remodeled with the true mark and returned to their previous height little by little, even surpassing the past. Their memories would return little by little and their personality would gradually change. Things that they had experienced would become more and more familiar. From the perspective of bystanders, the past was indeed what the returnees had experienced. But for the returnees themselves, the things they recalled weren't what they had experienced. The most important question was, if they returned, who was the returnee? Was it their current self? Or was it their past memories? Or was it something else? Every returnee needed an answer. This was the key to finding self-awareness. If self-awareness was unclear, there would be huge loopholes in the fate node and the will would become the most fatal flaw. This was not the first time such an example happened. There weren't many returnees, But some of them were bewitched by the order camp because they couldn't find a clear self-awareness and became puppets of the order camp. They thought that this world was full of loopholes needed to be repaired, or there was a huge flaw in their will and they were directly killed or even turned into shadow creatures. Or they didn't have a clear self-awareness and completely failed at the moment of returning. There weren't many such examples, but this was only because there weren't many returnees. If it was a specific group of returnees, the proportion wasn't low at all. The reason why they could return was because of the true mark. This was the basic prerequisite for returning. Secondly, it required a real environment. The starry sky was prosperous and lonely. Miracle City wasn't unique and there was more than one similar real environment. In each real environment, there was a returnee who was sprinting towards the peak of the past, whether consciously or unconsciously. The true imprint was the foundation of returning. The real environment was the prerequisite for him to return. When these were fully equipped, what the returnees needed the most was an imprint of themselves. It could also be considered some sort of ritual. The particularity of the real time and the real environment was the greatest capital of the returnees and the most distinct brand after they reshaped their lives. On the way back, everything they experienced in the real environment and the real time would become the clearest and most stable cognitive beacon. If the returnees were unknown in the real environment, they naturally wouldn't form a clear mark. So to put it bluntly, this consciousness wanted the returnees to leave a legend in the real environment so that they would not lose their self-awareness. An invincible legend. Therefore, Li Tianlan had to become stronger. This kind of strength was not only his own strength, but also his own influence. When the power of Emperor Dong's palace spread all over the world, when Li Tianlan could really reach the level of the Eternal Sword, he could really brand his own legend in the real environment of Miracle City. Then, on the way back to the peak, he could use this clear and real brand to fight against everything he had experienced in the past, and then find a clear self-awareness and his own answer. It's not like there aren't similar examples. Taking Miracle City as an example, the two most obvious examples were the human emperor and the god of war. In a sense, they could also be regarded as returnees. In terms of seniority, they should be about the same as the emperors of the space-time corridor. However, they had fallen too thoroughly at the beginning, and the human race had lost all information about them after rebooting again and again. No one knew who they used to be, including themselves. Both the human emperor and the god of war left their own legends in the environment of Miracle City. Then, with this imprint, they found their own answers, completely changed their nature, and returned to the peak. The human emperor became the firmament of the human clan. The god of war became the ocean of the human clan. This was the answer that belonged to them. And the legend of Li Tianlan had now begun. It was his time. It was their time. Dong Huang, Wu Qing. Except for Qin Wei Bai, they all needed to rebuild their own imprints in the real environment to fight against the confusion in the process of returning. And there should be no opponents in the legends of Dong Huang and Wu Qing. Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Wang Shengxiao, Gu Xingyun. Everyone who stood in front of Li Tianlan had to either surrender or die. And Jiang Shangyu, who was not strong but extremely sensitive, was undoubtedly the most difficult to deal with. His position made the whole neutral camp very careful. Wu Qing. If Miracle City was destroyed, it was a huge loss for the whole camp. As for Jiang Shangyu himself, it was necessary for Wu Qing and Li Tianlan to kill him. We have carefully analyzed the current situation of Miracle City, especially Jianghu State, and made a behavioral assessment of all high-level officials, including Li Huaqing. The error is very small. Shenyuan Wushang suddenly whispered, the high-level officials of Jianghu State can be said to be qualified leaders. They may have selfish motives, but people are not saints. On the major issues they have the same position. The environment limits their thinking, but from the perspective of Jianghu State, their thinking is actually not wrong. Big Brother's current status has made them feel uneasy and threatened. Emperor Dong's palace is about to lose the power that can balance him in Jianghu State, which is what most people don't want to see, especially Li Huaqing. So the parliament needs a person and force that can balance Emperor Dong's palace. Compared with Wang Shengxiao, who is ambiguous, Jiang Shangyu is the most suitable candidate. At some point, Gu Xingyun also needs to be protected temporarily. So if Jiang Shangyu doesn't die at this time, once he has contact with Jianghu State, no matter what mistakes he has made, because of the existence of Emperor Dong's palace, Jianghu State will keep him. In this case, the situation will be very complicated at that time. Xing Tian frowned. Yes. Shenyuan Wushang nodded and said, if things come to this point, Big Brother will be in a difficult situation. His combat capability can continue to grow, but the problem is that once Jiang Shangyu really enters Zhongzhou state, he is no longer an enemy from a general standpoint. If Big Brother wants to kill him, what he needs is not only the power to defeat Jiang Shangyu, but also the foundation to fight against the general environment of Zhongzhou state. So it's best to kill him now. Zhongzhou state can't contact or find Jiang Shangyu at present. Once King Wei's body merges with the sky-mending stone, he can directly locate Jiang Shangyu by using the hostility in the catastrophe. Before Zhongzhou state finds Jiang Shangyu and decides his position, his involvement with Phoenix Pavilion and with foreign forces can be defined as a crime. If he is killed, even if Zhongzhou state is angry, it can't say anything on the surface. If Jiang Shangyu can die this time, the neutral camp can breathe a sigh of relief, and there will be no accident that Big Brother will leave his own legend in Miracle City. He has grown to the point where all the variables no longer exist. In his low and gentle voice, the light of the multicolored stone in his hand finally spread to the distance. The colorful light turned into nothingness the moment it touched the real environment. The energy of nothingness followed the instinct of fusion and finally entered the Chen family's courtyard. Chapter 1143. Contemplation was an instinct, and over the long years, searching had become a habit. Ruthless had lost the ability to predict. From the point of view of living things, he was just a shell. Without a core similar to a soul, he had lost most of his emotions. His body was divided into murderous weapons and swords, and only the most vague instincts always maintained a little bit of his consciousness. This also became active in other people's eyes. So here, people called him vital metal. The cosmic radiation here was so weak that it was almost negligible. He was the sky-patching stone. And the sky-patching stone had little value in the real environment. The real environment was the same for him. In his eyes, it was a wasteland. The negligible cosmic radiation was not enough to support him even a little bit of recovery. Time was going on. His injuries were getting more and more severe, and his instincts were getting more and more blurry. On this planet where it was impossible for him to recover from his injuries and absorb enough energy, it was only a matter of time before he truly died. He would become a weapon that only had a little bit of activity left and could only unleash a small and somewhat laughable amount of power, or perhaps many weapons. His soul was missing. He also lost his emotions. So he didn't panic, and he didn't even know what panic was. His world was dull and dead. In different places, in different hands, in the vast torrent of time, he was always silently meditating and searching. He didn't know what he was thinking about or who he was looking for. His instincts were as pure as a piece of white paper. He had no emotions, and dullness seemed to have become his habit. Until he met Dongqing Huangtu. Dongqing Huangtu was no longer in his memory. But the first time he felt his existence, Ruthless was sure that he was the person he was looking for. He watched Dongqing Huangtu piece together his body little by little. He watched him walk to the top step by step. He watched him be invincible in the world and imprint his legend in Miracle City. The two rarely communicated, because Ruthless had lost the ability to speak. But the two accompanied each other, and they were the most reliable comrades in arms. He also participated in Dongqing Huangtu's pinnacle battle. Before that battle, he didn't have much energy left, but when the blade carried his sword chi and tore through the vast crowd of enemies, he still felt his withered thoughts and instincts gradually coming back to life. He watched when it came to Gu Xianyan's sword. Under the heavy snow of Kunlun that year, Gu Xianyan was already at the peak of the invincible realm. It could be said that it was one of the most powerful combat forces in the entire Dark World at that time. But the peak of the invincible realm, that kind of strength was nothing in front of him and Dongqing Huangtu. He and Dongqing Huangtu stood on the top of the snow-capped mountain, in the blood-stained snow. He and Dongqing Huangtu stared at the clear and resolute sword light. She was a peerless beauty, a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations and cities, a fairy that flew beyond the heavens. That is ruthless, really ruthless. There was only indifference in his thoughts. He didn't think that Gu Xianyan, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, could hurt Dongqing Huangtu. In that state, Dongqing Huangtu only needed to wait for the sword light to approach. With a casual raise of his hand, Gu Xianyan would fall directly into the blood and snow in front of them. Dongqing Huangtu was indeed waiting for that moment. They watched as the sword light drew closer and closer. Heartless and unmoving. Dongqing Huangtu didn't move. By the time Wu Qing realized something, it was already too late. At that moment, Dongqing Huangtu seemed to be empty. He just quietly admired the sword light, without any emotion, without any resistance. There was nothing. It was like he had lost everything. There was only the sword light in his eyes. In those years, the will of Wu Qing and Dongqing Huangtu seemed to have broken out for the first time in countless years. The moment he noticed that something was wrong, Wu Qing directly burst out all his remaining energy, trying to tear that damned woman to pieces. All the energy bursting out of him was suppressed by Dongqing Huangtu. His energy was completely exhausted. The powerful energy fought against Dongqing Huangtu's suppression. At the moment when Dongqing Huangtu was seriously injured, the sword pierced directly into his heart. He heard Dongqing Huangtu say with a smile, "It hurts." When was the first time he really recovered? He pondered silently. It seemed to be in Beihai. It was also the last time he fought side by side with that woman, who he wanted to cut into pieces. After his comrades in arms had fallen. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Time was meaningless, and he couldn't remember. He just remembered that damned woman appeared in front of him and calmly said that she wanted revenge. She could give everything. And Wu Qing just made a request. He wanted revenge too. So he would help Gu Xianyan. After revenge, he would kill Gu Xianyan with his own hands. The deal was made without any hesitation. So in that time and space, that era, that year, it was the most hysterical madness of a woman. Wu Qing appeared beside him. Within 7 days, 2 directors of Jianghu state died. In half a month, 1/3 of the members of the parliament died. All the people in Kunlun city were wiped out, and no one was spared. Thousands of people from more than 20 wealthy families in Jianghu state were killed. Confidential information was spread everywhere. Nearly half of the thunder-shocking realm experts in Jianghu state were slaughtered. The flame of hatred did not stop, igniting the whole Jianghu state and burning the whole world. The Vatican was destroyed, the Shadow Throne was destroyed, the Jiang family of South America was destroyed, the Heroes Club, the Men in Black. The fire of revenge, the invincible sword, and the silent man swept the whole dark world without any pause in less than 2 months. The whole world was in turmoil. A man and a sword finally rushed into Mount Dibing. Wang Tianzong died. Wang Shengxiao died. Summer Solstice died. Wang Xiaoyao died. Jiang Shangyu died. The 7 sword-holding families were all destroyed. Except for a few core figures who happened to be not in Mount Dibing at that time, the whole Beihai was killed. But Wu Qing did not fulfill his promise in the end. He failed to kill Gu Xianyan, who seemed to have lost her soul. At the moment when she died with Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, his energy was extremely weak, but his will was always at its peak. For the first time, Wu Qing felt the power from outside the truth. That power penetrated everything, like a reincarnation. In his perception, that power completely shattered Gu Xianyan, who had died at that time, and completely reorganized her, who had been crushed into a piece of elementary particles, into another Gu Xianyan. The process of time and space transfer was long and short. Countless memories began to flash in Wu Qing's mind. Dongqing Huangtu, Gu Xianyan, His Majesty, His Highness, King Wei. His will was completely immersed in the extremely messy picture. He watched as the somewhat familiar monks sent him to the bottom of the West Lake. He saw Gu Xianyan become Qin Wei Bai. He knew that Dongqing Huangtu became Li Tianlan again. Everything seemed to be starting over. As for Heartless, he completed his first revival in this environment where he had to start anew. Chapter 1144. The recovery process was long and slow. For the first time, Ruthless felt the soul separated from himself, the emotions separated from himself, and the protection and loyalty branded at the bottom of his body. The concept of responsibility became clear little by little from vague. He recalled the order and the shadow in his long thoughts. In his long thinking, he gradually recovered the maximum energy limit that could be accommodated in the split state of serious injury. In his lonely contemplation, he waited for Qin Wei Bai to borrow the sword for the second time. He left the bottom of West Lake. He went all the way north. In the end, there was the eternal sword above Mormons. That sword dispelled the shadow and depression of the entire dark world for Li Tianlan. The depression of the eternal night completely dissipated. The new era of Emperor Dong's palace came directly after that sword. The power of that sword was the limit of the real environment. It was far beyond the power of Ruthless himself. It was far beyond Qin Weibai's limit at that time. In the words of the Dark World, that was the limit of the Chosen One. That sword was completely above Wang Tianzong, who had entered that level at that time. And the price was naturally huge. Ruthless burst out all his energy to the greatest extent. At that moment, Qin Weibai was just doing one thing. Outbreak. Ignoring the consequences, life and death and everything else. The strongest outbreak of the peak invincible realm, which gave up life and death, made Qin Weibai vaguely cross the threshold of the peak invincible realm at the last second. At the moment when she was closest to death but also the most powerful, she transformed all her combat power into the 15th blade, Samsara, in the 24 moves of sword. She reincarnated the sword intent that belonged to Dongqing Huangtu deep in her memory. In the explanation of martial arts, Samsara belonged to the spiritual level. In terms of authority, the real situation was focused on the field of deception. At the moment when the sword light burst out, Qin Weibai successfully deceived herself and Ruthless. Even though it was only for less than a second. But in the blink of an eye, the rules of the world were also deceived for a moment. So in less than a second, Qin Weibai and Ruthless became Dongqing Huangtu in the peak state. All the sword energy that Qin Weibai burst out was completely absorbed by Ruthless. The sword formation of the 13-story building, headed by Flaming Fire, an expert of the invincible realm, was set up very smoothly. One person, one sword, and one formation were in absolute synchronization. So Ruthless completely broke out. It changed. He became a meteor in the sky above Mormons, directly locking on Wang Tianzong with an incomparably firm and majestic will. Qin Weibai, whose body was overdrawn, was infinitely close to death at the moment of his outburst. Her figure was falling. The meteor streaked across the sky. Precise, piercingly cold, swift, sharp, and decisive. At that time, Heartless, who had already started using Sword Dao Law once, did nothing. Because at that moment, he was the supreme law of the entire Sword Dao. The coldness of the 9 states shattered in an instant. The sword directly penetrated Wang Tianzong's chest. At the dawn of the new era, he once again returned to Li Tianlan's side. Qin Weibai? In fact, he did not care whether Qin Weibai was dead or not. He had only completed the first primitive revival. Li Tianlan's image was clear in his mind. Qin Weibai's influence was equally clear, but he did not know what it meant. In his opinion, it was not that important. Qin Weibai died. But Qin Weibai was still alive. This was not a problem. He seemed to be loyal only to Li Tianlan. He was his sharpest sword, the most powerful divine weapon that carried his martial arts, his most reliable comrade, and his most powerful left hand. Most of the time, Heartless could feel Li Tianlan's emotions. When his emotions fluctuated violently, Heartless could even clearly feel Li Tianlan's thoughts and killing intent. But his recovery process was limited. Being loyal to Li Tianlan was just his instinct. Most of the time, he was still in a very ignorant state. He learned about order and dark shadow. He understood who Li Tianlan's majesty referred to. He vaguely knew who he was. However, he had no idea what all of this meant. The second revival happened a few days ago. He saw a familiar but strange woman in the part of his body left on the forehead of the young highness. The woman easily controlled that part of his body, but it did not arouse his hostility. Half of the broken heart was pulled out by her, with a large number of memory fragments. After an inexplicable interception, it directly returned to his body. The memory fragments were played thousands of times a second. Heartless was completely sober. He understood his current state and his situation at this time. He also understood order and dark shadow. What it meant. At the same time, he further established a connection with Li Tianlan's will. When he used Li Tianlan's perspective to search the entire Jianghu state, his goal was actually very clear. He was looking for Jianghu. He had clearly felt the aura of Jianghu. It was a very weak but extremely clear aura of the dark shadow camp. But he searched the entire Jianghu state, but found nothing. Li Tianlan's will at this time obviously could not withstand a larger search. All Heartless could do was wait. After Li Tianlan's spirit recovered, he planned to carry out a second search outside the scope of Jianghu state. The unique perspective of Li Tianlan could easily search any corner of the world, and even see the specific shape of any grain of sand in the world. In that perspective, as long as Xianxia was still here, he could not escape. He stood silently in place, waiting silently. He had not waited for Li Tianlan's spirit to recover. But he waited for a touch of light to spread to this place. There was no luster, but in his consciousness, it was incomparably brilliant. The light spread from a distance little by little. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. Heartless remained silent. But the light that spread over strongly conveyed a feeling of joy and desire. This kind of emotion continued to spread with the light, and finally affected Heartless' will. This kind of emotion was so strong and so consistent. They longed to integrate and become complete. The light fell on Heartless. Heartless' body stiffened for a moment, and he slowly turned around. He silently looked in the direction of the light and gently raised his palm. Buzz! In the blink of an eye, everyone within a radius of several thousand meters heard an extremely sharp buzzing sound. This strange sound was like the wind and waves, and it spread throughout Yuzhou City in an instant. Inside and outside Yuzhou City, countless civilians raised their heads almost at the same time. Inside the Chen family's courtyard, Heartless' outstretched palms slowly clenched. Buzz! A clearer buzz resounded throughout Yuzhou again. Sharp, light, strong and piercingly cold. The long night was coming to an end. Dawn was like iron. At this moment, it was the first glimmer of dawn. In the eyes of countless people in Yuzhou City, an extremely trance and illusory storm suddenly rose over the entire Yuzhou. Chapter 1145. The tea was changed several times in a row. The water temperature changed from boiling hot to warm, and from warm to cold. The chill seemed to penetrate from the teacup and spread unscrupulously in the conference room. The coldness enveloped everyone. Under the still bright light, there were tired and hungry faces. There was no heating or air conditioning in the conference room. It used a relatively old fireplace. In the past, the fire here was very strong most of the time. But in this special period, both the Chen family and the giants in the conference room obviously didn't care about these little things. The Chen family was now in a mess. The mistress lost her chastity, and everyone's heart was full of despair. In the chaos, no one cared about this place. They didn't even send dinner, let alone supper. At this time, the long night was coming to an end, and the sky had become hazy. Most of the people in the conference room were already a little shaky in spirit. The clear and soft girl's voice finally stopped for a while. Li Huaqing silently held the newly changed teacup in his hand, took a sip of the cold tea, and didn't speak for a while. The conference room became quiet again. As a student of Gu Xingyun, no one could figure out why Gu Xianyan would betray and even get together with Qin Weibai. Even if the Phoenix Pavilion really existed, even if Gu Xianyan would be a member of the Phoenix Pavilion in the future, her final destination was bound to be an outstanding person of the generation, enjoying endless glory and wealth. Her betrayal was equivalent to completely exposing the ugly side of Kunlun City. The reason for the betrayal was no longer important. What mattered was what Gu Xianyan said. She was the core figure of Kunlun City, and everything she knew was far more than Mao Song. Mao Song only knew the location of one of Her Excellency Phoenix's schools. And Gu Xianyan directly revealed all the 3 art academies. One was in Huating. One was in the southwest. One was in Yuzhou. The first 2, especially the southwest, were beyond everyone's reach. As for Huating, because Counselor Zhong Yongming came from the Prince Group, it was enough for the Prince Group to be reserved when investigating this school. But it didn't matter. Yuzhou. As the capital of Zhongzhou State, all the major groups could have a certain voice and influence in Yuzhou. But there was no doubt that the strongest and deepest influence here, the Prince Group. Bai Zhanfeng had been the speaker of Yuzhou province for so many years. When Gu Xianyan told him the address of the school called Banxian in Yuzhou province, Bai Zhanfeng didn't even cooperate with the police department and the military department. Instead, he just had his secretary make a phone call. In less than 1 hour, all the officers of the Yuzhou Municipal Bureau had been dispatched to surround the school in the office building. Coincidentally, it was said that when the school was surrounded, there were more than 7 or 8 young and beautiful girls practicing seductive dances. In another classroom, there were more than 20 young and beautiful girls studying seriously. The blackboard was densely packed with treatises on how to seduce successful people, especially high-ranking officials, and the lecturer was the mistress of a deputy high-ranking official in a cabinet department. What was even more coincidental was that the high-ranking official was from the academic faction. After receiving a call from his mistress, he obviously didn't understand the situation, but he doted on her so much that he personally rushed over to help his mistress out of trouble. Now, that high-ranking official had been temporarily arrested by the Municipal Public Security Bureau. After learning all this, Li Huaqing was so angry that he smashed the teacup in his hand on the spot. Obviously, Phoenix Pavilion had more than all the ugly sides of Kunlun City. Gu Xianyan also said a lot of other things. The giants gradually became numb from the initial shock. During the hours-long narration, the atmosphere in the conference room continued to cool down, and finally fell to the freezing point. Gu Xianyan, who was not flustered in the face of so many giants for the first time, was calm and generous. After pausing for a few seconds, she said again, "Sister Qin said that if you have doubts about my testimony, we can provide a more critical witness. She has now come to Yuzhou." A more critical witness than Gu Xianyan? Li Huaqing was stunned and said subconsciously, "Who?" "Ms. Li Shi." Quietly, Gu Xianyan said the name that was more qualified to completely knock Gu Xingyun into the abyss than her. "Ms. Li Shi can prove every word I have said." Li Huaqing's heart suddenly shook, and he subconsciously clenched the newly changed teacup in his hand. Li Shi, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. Although she had gone to Shenyuan City now, her identity had not changed at all. Let her testify against Gu Xingyun. Xingyun. This matter was very cruel. But it was absolutely true. And was Li Shi's arrival just to prove Gu Xianyan's testimony? Li Huaqing was slightly shocked and subconsciously looked in the direction of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was still sitting in the rocking chair, calm and indifferent. In a trance, Gu Xianyan's voice continued to ring. "Not only what I said, but also the Li family's treason case more than 20 years ago. Ms. Li Shi can prove that this is a conspiracy originating from Kunlun City." At that time Gu Xingyun. "Enough." Li Huaqing suddenly spoke. His voice was not very excited, but it was extremely heavy. Everyone was stunned for a moment. In the corner, Li Tianlan's voice sounded almost immediately after Li Huaqing. "Go on." "It's not necessary." Li Huaqing suddenly waved his hand with great force. If this matter was said, Gu Xingyun would never have any possibility of turning over. Although he also wanted to know the truth more than 20 years ago, it was obviously more important to protect Gu Xingyun now. In today's Wenzhou state, there were not many chess pieces that could balance Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun's importance was becoming more and more obvious. This matter would be settled sooner or later, but not now. Li Tianlan sat up in the chair. He stood up slowly. All the exhausted giants felt their hearts clench. They were a little nervous. "I need to know the truth," Li Tianlan said lightly. His eyes were fixed on Li Huaqing's face. "The truth is not important." Li Huaqing did not retreat. "And this matter has not been confirmed. We will investigate secretly and give you a satisfactory explanation." He put extra emphasis on the words, satisfied. "Well." After a pause, Li Huaqing did not wait for Li Tianlan to say anything and continued. "From yesterday to now, a lot of things have happened here. Everyone needs a certain amount of time to think. In my opinion, the meeting is over. When everyone has recovered, we can continue to discuss. Tonight in the Hidden Dragon Sea, we will discuss this matter when all of us gather together." Li Huaqing stood up and announced calmly, "That's it. The meeting is over." Chapter 1146. In all fairness, during the years when Li Huaqing was in charge of Zhongzhou State, he could not be regarded as a strong president. This had something to do with the lack of foundation of the academics and the constraints of the Prince Group and the Southeast Group. It also had something to do with Li Huaqing's conduct. Li Huaqing did not advocate hegemony. A leader who advocated hegemony was not destined to sit in his position. He paid attention to the overall situation, balance, and stability. In his hands, it was never a life-and-death struggle, but more like an art of compromise. So most of the time, his performance was always a little meek, and even sometimes it could be said that he was weak. But even so, he controlled Zhongzhou State with a weak group. In the face of several covetous opponents, he could always ensure that the situation of Zhongzhou State was in his own hands. Such a means could even be said to be wise. Because of this, at this time, Li Huaqing seemed a little strange in everyone's eyes. At this moment, he announced the end of the meeting, and his attitude and momentum were unexpectedly tough. He stood up, picked up the teacup, and looked at Li Tianlan in the shadow. His majesty was irresistible. The conference room became quiet again. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, looked at Li Huaqing quietly, and did not speak for a long time. The atmosphere was suddenly oppressive and a little suffocating. Li Huaqing said the end of the meeting. Li Tianlan did not move. The others did not move either. What did this mean? The muscles in the corners of Li Huaqing's eyes twitched fiercely. President, how should we deal with Gu Xingyun? A calm voice suddenly rang out. Among the giants present, Zhou Mulin, who should have supported Li Tianlan the most, stood up and tidied up the documents. It seemed that he was responding to Li Huaqing's order to end the meeting. Li Tianlan said the end of the meeting. Li Tianlan did not say anything. The others did not move either. Was it because Li Tianlan did not say anything, so the others did not dare to leave? This was nonsense. At least Zhou Mulin did not think so. Such a scene might happen, but it should not happen to Li Tianlan. If today's Li Tianlan was replaced by Wang Tianzong at his peak, such a scene was possible. Li Tianlan? Compared with Sword Emperor at his peak, Dong Huang today still lacked too many things. His combat capability might have surpassed Wang Tianzong before the breakthrough, but some things could not be manifested by pure combat capability. Prestige, experience, resources, power and foundation were all indispensable. It would take a long time for Li Tianlan to reach this level. There was only one possibility for such a situation to occur, and that was that the other giants had ill intentions. They might be afraid of Li Tianlan, but they were definitely not afraid of him. Li Tianlan wanted to have a thorough discussion about the problems of the Li family and Gu Xingyun. He did not want to adjourn the meeting, and they were willing to cooperate. Even the prince group, which wanted to protect Kunlun City, was willing to cooperate. This would only further enrage Li Huaqing, and it might even turn the anger in his heart into killing intent. And no matter how much murderous intent there was, as the president, in order to maintain his dignity, he had to ensure that his orders and will were unimpeded in such a situation. So the meeting would still end. Furthermore, the academics would pay more attention to protecting Kunlun City. This was no longer just about the stability of the situation, but also about Li Huaqing's own prestige. In this case, Li Tianlan stubbornly refused to retreat, and the final outcome was really unpredictable. At least in this matter, the attitude of the Southeast group would be very ambiguous. They expressed a certain degree of support for the matter of Kunlun City, but if Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing fought tit for tat, they would 100% remain neutral. There would be support from the North group, but it would not be too much. In this way, the whole giant group would stand behind Li Tianlan to fight against the academics and the prince group. It was not impossible, but as far as this matter was concerned, it was actually meaningless. Li Huaqing wanted to protect Gu Xingyun, but it did not mean that he wanted to completely suppress the treason case of the Li family. He had just made it clear that he would give Li Tianlan a satisfactory explanation. In this case, why should he provoke the hostility of the whole academics at this time? Things had developed to this point, involving Li Huaqing's dignity, and it was no longer a business matter. Therefore, the best choice at the moment was to follow Li Huaqing's will. Concession and compromise. This was the theme of Jianghu. Zhou Mulin winked in Li Tianlan's direction. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and suddenly waved to Gu Xianyan in the center of the conference room. Gu Xianyan was stunned, as if she couldn't believe it. She hesitated and walked to Li Tianlan. "Little Bai's sister?" Li Tianlan smiled and touched Gu Xianyan's little head. "Yes." Gu Xianyan nodded hard, and her little face turned red. "Let's go, I'll treat you to breakfast," Li Tianlan said calmly, then turned and walked to the door. Before going out, he looked back at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing still stood where he was. Feeling Li Tianlan's gaze, he nodded and said, "Come to my office in the afternoon." Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth, then turned and walked out. The giants also slowly stood up, struggled to stand up with their tired bodies, and walked out of the conference room one by one. Li Tianlan stood quietly in the courtyard outside the conference room, slightly narrowed his eyes, and quietly looked at the gradually brightening dawn on the horizon, as if waiting for the morning sun. Li Huaqing hesitated, approached Li Tianlan, and said with a chuckle, "What are you looking at?" "Sword," Li Tianlan said subconsciously, then shook his head and said, "It's energy." In his perception, the whole space of Yuzhou seemed to be becoming thick and solid. A touch of seemingly weak but incomparably majestic energy was pouring into the courtyard of the Chen family with a very excited mood. This kind of energy was familiar and strange. That seemed to be the direction of the interrogation room? Li Tianlan suddenly turned his head. At the same time, in the small lounge of the interrogation room, Wu Qing clenched his fists tightly. Buzz! A buzzing sound suddenly rang out without any warning. The entire courtyard of the Chen family suddenly turned from dawn to day. Countless sword energy directly filled the world without any warning. Light and shadow flew wildly. Around Li Tianlan, around everyone, in every corner of the entire courtyard of the Chen family, sword energy phantoms in the shape of long swords flew in the air one after another. Light, sharp, decisive and heavy. Each sword was in a different shape. Straight, crooked, broken, front to back. All the sword energy phantoms kept flying. Crack! A subtle sound suddenly sounded in the flying phantoms. Gu Xianyan lowered her head slightly and touched her waist subconsciously. On her waist hung a short sword that was only a little longer than an ordinary dagger. At this time, the short sword trembled violently and broke directly into two pieces. More and more sword energy phantoms filled the world. The ceiling of the interrogation room had long been broken. More sword energy rushed over from all directions on the ground and began to surge toward the sky. Buzz! The second buzz suddenly sounded and resounded throughout the city. At this moment, everyone saw the sudden storm over Yuzhou City. Sword energy storm. There were sword chi phantoms everywhere, densely packed and endless. They converged in the same direction and rushed to the sky at the core. The storm swept everything in the sky. There was no morning light, no darkness, no clouds. At this moment, the sky over Yuzhou was full of swords. Swords of all shapes and sizes were densely packed. Li Tianlan looked at it silently. At this moment, his mood was with a kind of peace that even he himself could not understand. In his perception, Wu Qing's aura was growing wildly, almost surpassing the peak of his cognition in a flash. He was not excited at all, only calm inside. Buzz! The third buzzing sound rang out. The sword energy flying in the sky and on the ground rushed straight to the sky as if they had received a guide. The dense sword energy gathered in one place, like a sword energy dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long. Wu Qing's body, like a meteor, went all the way up with the sword energy storm that swept the whole city. Almost in the blink of an eye, he left Li Tianlan's perception range. All the way to the south, the sword energy storm disappeared. The sky of Yuzhou was completely lit up. The sun rose. The morning light was like fire. Chapter 1147. Li Tianlan stood quietly in the fiery morning light, closed his eyes, and his expression was unprecedentedly calm. Ruthless, with the dragon-like sword energy storm, completely left his perception range under the witness of Yuzhou in the morning. Everyone stared at this scene with their mouths agape. Martial arts? Everyone tried to understand it, but not many people could convince themselves. What they had just seen was not as simple as martial arts. Countless shadows of sword energy completely covered the entire sky of Yuzhou City. This was a real celestial phenomenon. Triggering celestial phenomena with individual strength. If this was martial arts, would there be an end to martial arts? Ruthless figure had completely disappeared. The morning light shone all over the sky. In people's sight, the mighty dragon of sword energy still had not disappeared. It continued to roll in the far distance of their sight, moving forward rapidly. Yuzhou witnessed this scene in the early morning. What next? Before he reached his destination, perhaps everyone in all the places he passed by would witness this miraculous scene. Martial arts was not a secret among the people. But most people's understanding of martial arts stopped at the thunder-shocking realm. How big a storm would this dragon of sword energy cause in Jianghu state now? Li Huaqing was the first to think of this question. He had a headache. Staying up late and hunger seemed to have made him unable to get angry. He rubbed his forehead, smiled bitterly and whispered, "What the hell is going on?" "I don't know," Li Tianlan said softly. He still closed his eyes and stood where he was. His figure surrounded by the sun seemed to be emitting an extremely illusory light. Compared with the ups and downs of other people's hearts, Li Tianlan, who really felt all this and vaguely knew what was going on, did not feel any fluctuation in his heart. He was not surprised by ruthless state at this time. He was not surprised by ruthless current behavior. There was no excitement, no joy, no loss, no anger, and no doubt. Therefore, his reply to Li Huaqing was truly calm and peaceful. Even a minute ago, he forced himself to leave the conference room, and he was already very dissatisfied with Li Huaqing. But now all of this disappeared. All the emotions, all the murderous intent, all the hostility. It seemed that they were all taken away by Ruthless and the Dragon of Sword energy. He knew that all of this had something to do with Ruthless, but he didn't know what was going on. But now he didn't want to know. No emotions, no desires. What kind of calmness was this? It was a state of emptiness that he had never experienced before. Ruthlessness was gone. Finally, the sword Qi Berserk dragon disappeared from his perception. Li Tianlan closed his eyes, but he could really see the world. Everyone around him, every house, every plant, every leaf, and even every bit of air. The world was silent. Quiet, soft, tough, but also incomparably fragile. Li Tianlan didn't think about anything. But some things that he couldn't understand before suddenly had an extremely clear answer. At this moment, he seemed to have come into contact with something that he had been pacing back and forth outside the door all this time but had never been able to enter. This thing seemed to be, maybe it should be called, rules. From a scientific point of view, the so-called rules were explained in physics. The rules that Li Tianlan came into contact with were not general. It was precisely because it wasn't general that the part of the laws he was exposed to was extremely small in the entire physics. It was like a water molecule in the ocean. The current scientific level of Miracle City could already observe the vague outline of the seaside in the ocean of physics, but they hadn't seen the real boundless ocean, let alone the details of a water molecule. Li Tianlan didn't see the boundless ocean, either. But at this moment, he seemed to be in the sea, completely surrounded by a water molecule. This distance was too close. He was even inside the water molecule now, so he could see all this very clearly. This was a physical detail that Miracle City had never discovered at present. Because it was too small, it was not noticed. And because it was too small, it was particularly detailed in Li Tianlan's eyes. This was physics. It was also a rule. It was about power and martial arts. This seemed to have little to do with physics, but if magnified, martial arts and power were also part of the physical world. And what was displayed in front of Li Tianlan at this time was a small part of the rules of martial arts and power. All the exclamations, discussions, and inquiries around him fell into his ears, but they didn't disturb him at all. The rules in front of him seemed to give up all restraint and appeared in front of him little by little. This structure was extremely clear and detailed. Li Tianlan finally understood something. All the emotions and desires seemed to suddenly begin to return from afar. Li Tianlan opened his eyes. His heart was still calm. The emotions that had been taken away by Ruthless returned completely. However, his enmity and killing intent still formed into a sword Qi Berserk dragon, surging in the air. So Li Tianlan's emotions still didn't fluctuate. He opened his eyes and looked at the magnates around him. The magnates in the conference room. The magnates and the members of parliament in the interrogation room. And the secretaries of the leaders. Even the people of the Chen family were all around him at this time. They had all confirmed that it was Ruthless who left here. And the strange astronomical phenomenon just now also had a lot to do with Ruthless. Everyone wanted an explanation. Only Li Tianlan could give this explanation. Li Tianlan looked at them silently. From an extremely clear perspective, he clearly saw everyone's expression. Dongqing Wudi, Bai Zhanfeng, Zhou Mulin, and others were very excited, and they couldn't even hide the smiles on their faces. The magnates and the members of the prince group looked gloomy and even worried. Ruthless was Li Tianlan's weapon. Now a weapon had caused such a scene. No one knew why, but there was no doubt that all of this could be regarded as part of Li Tianlan's combat capability. And the stronger Li Tianlan was now, the more dangerous the prince group was. Based on this, Li Huaqing and Hua Vangyang also looked a little worried. Only Zhou Yunhai, the magnate of the North Group, lowered his head silently, as if deep in thought. I can't give any explanation. A very faint smile appeared at the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth. He glanced around and finally saw Qin Wei Bai at the outermost edge of the crowd. Gu Xianyan also appeared beside Qin Wei Bai. Both of them were looking at him, their eyes shining. "If you really want to explain," Li Tianlan chuckled. "Everyone, I can announce a piece of news with certainty here." His voice was indifferent and calm. "I am already truly invincible in the world." When saying this, he stared directly at the two magnates of the Wang family of Beihai. "No one is my opponent." His voice grew calmer. "No one." Chapter 1148. What did that mean? Li Tianlan's voice was so abrupt that everyone froze subconsciously. People were still waiting for Li Tianlan's explanation of the celestial phenomenon with different moods. No one expected him to announce such a news. Invincible? Many people complained in their hearts. Do you need to announce it yourself? Even if you don't say it yourself, don't we know that you are invincible in the world? But then, people saw the direction Li Tianlan was looking at. Li Tianlan was looking at Ji Wenzhang and Wan Qingyun. The two giants of Beihai, who first felt Li Tianlan's gaze, were not confused. They stood quietly in front of the crowd and looked at Li Tianlan. Their faces were unprecedentedly dignified and serious. Li Tianlan's eyes did not have a strong sense of oppression, but they were extremely deep. It was a kind of indescribable confidence and peace. There was no fighting intent in his eyes at all, and even a trace of loneliness. They had seen similar eyes before the chaos of the Snow Empire. They had seen it in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Invincible. Everyone gradually understood what the so-called invincible meant. In the era after Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan was indeed invincible. But now, Li Tianlan was clearly saying that even if Wang Tianzong recovered from his injury, he was also invincible. But how many days had it been since Li Tianlan broke through the invincible realm? How was that possible? Chosen one. Ji Wenzhang narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked in a low voice. The crowd suddenly fell silent. The Chosen One was never a realm. It was a name for the absolutely invincible. Before the invincible realm, the first person to step into the thunder-shocking realm was equivalent to the Chosen One of that era. When there was no realm above the invincible realm, Wang Tianzong, who was the first to walk out of the invincible realm, could also be called the Chosen One. This meant absolute, complete, and irresistible dominance over the current era. Supremacy. Li Tianlan was indeed invincible before, but he was far from being called the Chosen One. Because he still had opponents. Wang Xianxiao, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu were all qualified to be his opponents. They might not be able to beat Li Tianlan, or they might be a little worse, but Li Tianlan did not have absolute dominance over them. Just like Wang Tianzong before. Before the breakthrough, he was also invincible. But no one called him a prodigy. In that era, in addition to Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu and Lin Yuxian could represent the limit of combat capability. It was the same as what happened to Li Tianlan. What is true supremacy and absolute dominance? By the standards of this era. In the most extreme case, if Jiang Shangyu, Wang Xianxiao, Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun, and all the experts of the invincible realm and the half-step invincible realm joined hands to besiege Li Tianlan, if Li Tianlan could defeat them all easily, only then could he be called a proud son of heaven. This was the true supremacy of the world. As for the peak of the thunder-shocking realm below the half-step invincible realm, it was impossible for them to cause any harm to Li Tianlan. Just like Wang Tianzong in Mormons at that time. Although there were not many people besieging him with his state and strength at that time, if not for the eternal sword, as long as he wanted to, he could completely wipe out all the experts in the entire dark world. They were all experts. Has Li Tianlan already set foot on this level? Thinking of this possibility, everyone's gaze became somewhat complicated. Such complexity didn't matter where they stood. Even Gua Wentian, who wanted to target Li Tianlan the most, was a little excited at the thought of this possibility. However, the excitement was also mixed with a touch of fear and worry. This was a question that didn't need to be said. If Li Tianlan could reach this level, Zhongzhou state, which was guarded by him in the future, would also become supreme in the entire dark world. The so-called superpowers and the so-called invincible realm experts were non-entities from the perspective of Zhongzhou state. The dark world was not a place name or a certain area. To explain it in the simplest way, the dark world was the dark side of the international community. All the series of transactions, conflicts, compromises, and negotiations that were not publicized were all part of the Dark World. Internationally, the Dark World was the most important part of all the superpowers. The sanctions that countries shouted all day might be equally effective, but in places that no one could see, the secret battles were the most important. In the era of nuclear deterrence, the possibility of a full-scale war breaking out between the major powers was infinitely close to zero. In this state, the repeated battles in the Dark World had already represented the strength of a country to a certain extent.
Jianghu state had nearly 4 million troops.
Its military strength was the first in the world. Its technology and economy were developed, and its national strength was strong. But these were the defense of its own country and the deterrence to the outside world. In the dark, the individuals that represented the combat strength limit of each country were the invisible swords that each powerful country hid to kill people. It was difficult for Jianghu state to cross the sea and kill the high-level officials of other countries at will, not to mention 4 million troops.
But Li Tianlan could. He could do what millions of troops couldn't do.
Then his existence was more valuable than millions of troops. This was the simplest logic.
If Li Tianlan really became the heavenly son of this world,
while he was supreme in his personal field, the country he guarded would also be truly supreme in his peak.
Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan silently. Everyone was looking at him.
Everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and passion. Beneath the excitement and passion, there were other emotions that were different for everyone. Guo Wentian's excitement was mixed with a trace of fear. Li Huaqing's eyes were also excited, but with a touch of hesitation and contemplation. Zhou Yunhai's excitement was mixed with a touch of amazement. Dongqing Wudi's excitement was mixed with relief. Ji Wanzhong and Wan Qingyun were also excited, but there was a touch of unwillingness in their excited eyes. At the outermost edge of the crowd, Qin Weibai's eyes were shining, full of affection and pride. Li Tianlan smiled and answered Ji Wanzhong's question. Not yet. But it doesn't matter. Not yet the heavenly son, but it didn't matter. Silently pondering this sentence, most people subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they were a little confused.
Li Tianlan didn't explain too much.
He was indeed not the heavenly son now. At least in terms of realm, Wang Tianzong's realm was higher than his. His foundation was absolutely solid, so the moment he broke through to the invincible realm, his realm had been stabilized. At present, Li Tianlan's real realm was only close to the peak of the invincible realm. This so-called close, in fact, was still some distance away. But his real combat capability was far beyond his realm. In terms of real combat capability, he should be a little worse than Wang Tianzong in his strongest state. But Li Tianlan still thought he was invincible. His combat capability was indeed not as good as Wang Tianzong's, but even if Wang Tianzong recovered to the peak now, it would be difficult for him to kill him. In the battle between the two, Li Tianlan might be suppressed, or he might be a little embarrassed, but the only possibility was that it would be a long battle of attrition.
And Li Tianlan now had a second heart.
He didn't know what it meant, but he was very sure that with the support of the second heart, his physical strength was completely endless. In other words, he could fight with Wang Tianzong for a day in a suppressed state.
Even a week was no problem.
What realm are you in now?
After a little hesitation, Li Huaqing asked in a deep voice.
The realm is not the essence.
Li Tianlan answered without answering the question. His voice was very erratic.
The realm was not the essence.
He realized this a long time ago, but it was not very clear.
At that time, tribulation could go straight from the Qi-controlling realm to the invincible realm, and he even caught up with Wang Tianzong after the breakthrough. At the peak of the Li family, Fireman had also killed a half-step invincible realm expert with the strength of the fire-flaming realm. And he could kill an invincible realm expert in seconds without entering the invincible realm.
All this seemed to prove a problem.
The 4 realms of martial arts, which had been circulating in the dark world for hundreds of years, were not wrong, but the realm was not the essence of martial arts. The essence of martial arts was eternal. That was the eternal power and speed. This belonged to physics, and when extended to a higher level, it was the rules.
Martial arts was also a part of physics.
If physics was a starry sky, then the rules of martial arts in physics were a vast ocean. Li Tianlan had just stood in that vast ocean and completely mastered a water molecule in this vast ocean. It was a very small thing, but it was also the most essential thing. With this water molecule, Li Tianlan vaguely had the idea of analyzing the whole ocean. He could do it. But it would take time. And judging from the small part of the rules he now mastered, even if he went all the way from the invincible realm to the chi-controlling realm, or even didn't enter the 4 realms of martial arts, he could still be invincible.
Do you think you are invincible because Shen Yuanfeng gave you the confidence? Ji Wenzhang suddenly asked. As the divine weapon that once cut off the coldness of 9 states, Shen Yuanfeng was now the well-deserved first sword in the Dark World. Feng could be said to be the well-deserved top sword in the Dark World, and more information about Shen Yuanfeng. Many people already knew that Shen Yuanfeng was a combination of several murderous weapons, and when they were scattered, they were equivalent to an invincible sword formation. Although they didn't know what the celestial phenomenon just now was, at least they could be sure that Shen Yuanfeng had recovered some energy to some extent. Although they didn't know how much the so-called some was, Shen Yuanfeng with energy was called ruthless. Many people thought of the shocking sword outside the desert prison. That kind of energy plus Li Tianlan's own strength, Li Tianlan could indeed say that he was invincible. I'm talking about myself. Li Tianlan smiled casually and didn't bother to say anything more. He was now in an unusually calm and peaceful mood, and the hostility and killing intent had been taken away. Now it could be said that it was the best time for him to talk. Ji Wenzhang and Wan Qingyun looked at each other and read each other's thoughts, but they didn't speak. The Southeast group began to fall into a state of contradiction. The identity of enemy and friend was very vague in Jianghu's mind, because there were no eternal friends and no eternal enemies. With the scandal between Murong Xiao and Yuan Lin, the Southeast group supported Li Tianlan's action. Among the 6 groups in Jianghu State, the academics now stood at the highest position, but in terms of foundation, development time, hidden trump cards, cohesion, scale, and strength, there were only 2 of the 6 groups that were the strongest. That was the Southeast group and the Prince group. Both groups had produced several presidents and prime ministers. Li Huaqing's predecessor was from the Prince group, and so was his predecessor. And the more senior one was the leader of the Southeast group. This kind of advantage was not something that other groups could make up for in a short time. The giant group was also very large. In its heyday, it was even larger than the Prince group and the Southeast group. Although it had been cleared in the past 2 years, its remaining scale was not smaller than the Southeast group and the Prince group. But the situation of their existence to some extent was equivalent to a loose alliance composed of many wealthy families in Jianghu State. It seemed to be majestic, but in fact, its core strength was very small. Many wealthy families first considered their own interests and basically did not make a unified voice. Their core strength was only in Zhongyuan province, Yuzhou, and some positions in the army headquarters. For other groups, the giant group could not be underestimated, but at the same time, they didn't need to worry too much. The special warfare group rose in the shortest time and had the worst foundation. They were even worse than the giant group. Most of their strength was concentrated inside the special warfare system, so they didn't need to worry too much. The current situation of the North Group stemmed from a decision-making mistake made by the group's top management decades ago. They suffered a crushing defeat in that game, which affected them to this day. They had been unable to recover their strength and even became more and more salted fish. The strength of the academics couldn't be underestimated now, but it also needed time to surpass the Southeast Group. And Li Huaqing had less than 6 years. In other words, as long as they could give the Prince Group a heavy blow, the Southeast Group would almost be the dominant existence in the future situation of Zhongzhou State's Jianghu. After the top combat power in the Dark World was transferred to Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai obviously adjusted its strategy, intending to make itself stronger in the field of Jianghu in Zhongzhou State. Their main opponents now were almost all concentrated in Zhongzhou State. When Jianghu became stronger, even if they lost their strongest combat power, they could still deal with all kinds of problems with ease. Li Tianlan blew the horn of counterattack, and the Southeast Group naturally didn't mind cooperating. While attacking the Prince Group, they could also tear a piece of meat from the other party to supplement themselves. It was just that things were developing too fast. From the moment Mao Song mentioned Phoenix Pavilion until now, the 2 leaders of the Southeast Group had never really made up their minds, which also made their performance a little contradictory. Sometimes they supported Li Tianlan, and sometimes they supported Li Huaqing. They swayed and obviously couldn't make up their minds. Li Tianlan's strength was not good news for them. But if they gave up, it was tantamount to giving up the opportunity to cut a piece of meat from the Prince Group.
How to contain Li Tianlan to a certain extent and at the same time make themselves benefit was the primary problem facing the Southeast group now. The situation in Jianghu state was now at the critical moment of the multi-party game, chaotic and sensitive. The Prince group wanted to protect itself, the new group wanted to rise, the academics wanted to balance, the Southeast group wanted to make profits, the giant group was considering transformation, the North group was testing, and the tottering special warfare group was also struggling. No one knew what the situation in Jianghu state would be after the storm ended. Balance. In such a situation, balance was easier said than done. Intentionally or unintentionally, Ji Wanzhong glanced at Li Huaqing. In the current situation, it seemed that only Li Huaqing could get a little chance. Chapter 1149. What did it feel like to be completely torn apart spiritually? The real answer seemed to be that there was no feeling. Spirit, consciousness, soul. Everything was constantly separated, and the process kept repeating. The perception of the body completely disappeared. Every second of thought, every heartbeat, every emotion began to become an individual with only one. He never existed, but it seemed to be everywhere. It was a feeling that the body had become the world. The only remaining thought became the eyes of the world, silently observing the world created by his thoughts, emotions, and soul. He saw his flesh and blood turn into an ocean. He saw his body turn into a mountain. He saw his palm turn into a continent. He saw his facial features turn into an abyss. He was everywhere, but it seemed that he never existed. He saw his countless emotions turn into countless people in his world. Men, women, old people, children, emperors, beggars, businessmen, high officials. Different people, different identities, different thoughts. But they all had a common name. They were all called Gu Xingyun. There were more and more Gu Xingyun, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions. In the world he created, there were more and more Gu Xingyun. They appeared in every corner irregularly and died or became monsters irregularly. The remaining strand of thought of his true form saw with his own eyes that Gu Xingyun in a certain city suddenly turned into a demon with black blood flowing all over its body without warning. Then, in the very next second, he saw countless Gu Xingyun in another city surrounded by holy light turning into majestic and holy angels. Tens of thousands of Gu Xingyun entered a chaotic and uncontrollable state from the moment they appeared. More Gu Xingyun would turn into creatures that Gu Xingyun himself didn't know what they were at 1 second, and then they would turn into himself at another second. He who became a devil might turn into an angel in the next second, and there would also suddenly be a devil among the group of angels. So the devil appeared among the angels, and the angel appeared among the devil's team. It was messy and arbitrary. The war of countless Gu Xingyun began. The battle between the devil and the angel? No, not at all. The angel Gu Xingyun were also fighting with each other, and the devil Gu Xingyun were also fighting. The city inexplicably turned into a basin. All kinds of Gu Xingyun began to gather toward the basin, and all kinds of changes continued irregularly. The devil became an angel, the angel became a plant, the plant became a human, and the human became a strange species. Killing. Everyone was fighting crazily. He didn't have any stance. Specifically speaking to Gu Xingyun, it seemed that everyone in this world was an enemy except for himself. It was a kind of incomprehensible fanaticism and madness. They ignored death, pain, and dignity. The only purpose of their existence seemed to be to kill. They were like weapons that were in a state of chaos. Domains, sword qi, and all kinds of sword lights crisscrossed. Gu Xingyun's eyes gradually became stunned. What appeared in his world was a large number of unique skills that he had never understood in detail before. Jade Lake's 7 absolute swords. The 4 sword intents of Shu Mountain. The sword path of the East Island sect. Hung was complex and profound truth handprint. The paladin of the holy domain. The 30-meter mortal world of the Jianghu family of South America. Countless unique skills appeared in the hands of Gu Xingyun one after another. They were clearly imprinted in Gu Xingyun's eyes and even in his soul. However, among these countless unique skills, there was number 24 moves of sword or the 6 paths of reincarnation sword. Gu Xingyun's thoughts were constantly diverging. The Gu Xingyun on the battlefield disappeared at an unimaginable speed. In the end, there were only dozens of Gu Xingyun left. The men and women tore each other's clothes crazily. It seemed that they were overwhelmed by desire and suddenly attacked each other the next second. The male Gu Xingyun began to make a woman's voice, and the female Gu Xingyun's roar was close to that of a beast. The devil and the angel appeared again. The battle began again. Then, Gu Xingyun increased again and became even more bizarre. Gu Xingyun watched silently. This nightmarish and absurd picture kept deepening the impression in his mind. He was infinitely close to being lost, but he always remained sober. Darkness, chaos, blood, absurdity. Time had no meaning. It seemed that thousands of years had passed. But it also seemed that only a second had passed. Gu Xingyun felt his body for the first time. In front of him was still the white-hot scene of fighting. He subconsciously wanted to close his eyes. So darkness fell in an instant. All the pictures and all the sounds suddenly disappeared. The surroundings seemed to fall into an unprecedented silence. There was only the cold wind blowing in the darkness, which was piercingly cold. Gu Xingyun was a little confused. He subconsciously froze for a moment, and then he opened his eyes. The incomparably chaotic scene that he had expected had already disappeared. In front of him stood a figure that Gu Xingyun felt a little familiar. While he saw the other party was also looking at him carefully. He narrowed his eyes, which were flashing with killing intent, serious and cold. Gu Xingyun seemed to be unable to remember who the other party was for a while. But the moment he saw the other party, a strong killing intent also emerged in his heart. Interesting. After a short confrontation, Li Guangtu, who stood in front of Gu Xingyun, twitched the corner of his mouth and smiled coldly. I see a stranger in your eyes. You don't know me? You, Gu Xingyun shook his head. Countless memory fragments and thoughts poured into his mind crazily with his movements. Gu Xingyun suddenly covered his head and howled extremely miserably. The incomparably manic sound waves suddenly converged. The surrounding space directly fluctuated with Gu Xingyun's howl. The sound spread wildly around with almost incredible power. In Li Guangtu's sight, with Gu Xingyun as the center, all the space around him seemed to be directly squeezed and shattered. In just a moment, he was already standing in Gu Xingyun's domain. Countless sword lights and sword chi were constantly flashing in the domain. The domain and sword chi maintained a chaotic but coexisted posture and merged together. The crazy killing intent directly locked on Li Guangtu. Oh, you've grown up. Li Guangtu stood in Gu Xingyun's domain, and the distance between him and Gu Xingyun could be said to be very close. If you dare to attack me, I dare to kill you here. Do you want to have a try? Li Guangtu. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth. His brain was still a little chaotic, but he had roughly remembered everything. He still needs time to recuperate. Another calm and gentle voice sounded behind Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun turned his head subconsciously. Jianghu was sitting on the grass not far behind him, looking at him with a very satisfied look. How do you feel? Gu Xingyun shook his head again. More and more memories assaulted his will and mind without stopping. Gu Xingyun remembered a lot of things. In less than a minute, his memory had almost completely recovered, but the order was a little messed up. He sorted out the chaotic memories and always felt that he had forgotten something, but he didn't know what it was. I can roughly understand your feelings. It's normal to be a little confused. Your breakthrough this time is very successful, even beyond my expectations. You still need to adapt to your realm and strength. When you fully adapt, you will be the new god of war of Jianghu state, and your thinking will not be affected. Jiang Shangyu's smile was bright and almost gentle. Gu Xingyun's successful breakthrough was part of it. It took longer than expected for him to break through this time, and the result was also beyond expectations. The realm that Gu Xingyun could exert was probably still at the peak of the invincible realm. But he was infinitely close to a new level. Maybe he was only half a step away, or even just a small half step away, and he could push aside the obstacles in front of him and formally enter the level where he and Li Guangtu were now. The most important thing was Gu Xingyun's body. Although his realm had not changed, the injuries in his body had been completely healed. Moreover, his physical strength had entered the level beyond the peak of the invincible realm in advance of his realm. In this state, Gu Xingyun was still not a match for Li Guangtu in his heyday, but Li Guangtu was not in his heyday now. If the two of them really fought, it was hard to say what the result would be. After all, Li Guangtu refused to accept further transformation from the dark shadow. He had stayed here for a few days. Although his injury had mostly recovered, it was not as thorough as Gu Xingyun's. In other words, the current Li Kuangtu had no overwhelming combat power to suppress Gu Xingyun. This also meant that from now on, the Dark World had one more figure who could stand at the peak of this era. Jiang Shangyu's facial features seemed to contain a deep smile. This kind of peak figure had become his subordinate at this time. Including the entire Kunlun city, at this time, was already his force. This feeling was simply indescribable. Gu Xingyun might not realize this. But he was now half a shadow creature. In the Dark Shadow Camp, as long as Jiang Shangyu's authority was higher than his, Gu Xingyun would never have the possibility to disobey his orders. Jiang Shangyu suddenly felt a little regretful. If Li Kuangtu could not resist the temptation and accepted the transformation of the Dark Shadow, then this time he would annex not only Kunlun City, but also the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was the best result. After accepting the transformation, Li Kuangtu could also go further without disobeying his orders, and could even reach Li Tianlan's current level of combat power. In that case, in the entire Dark World, his will would be truly supreme, and he would become the chosen one who was not the chosen one. Jiang Shangyu shook his head. That step was still far away at present. But now, congratulations to both of you. And congratulations to myself. Jiang Shangyu smiled softly. Our era from this second has come. It belongs to our Dark Shadow era. Chapter 1150. Li Kuangtu looked at Jiang Shangyu expressionlessly and then at Gu Xingyun. In the end he did not speak. He was never a fool. On the contrary, as a figure who could compete with Wang Tianzong in the last era, he was smarter and even wiser than most people. During the days he lived in this weird village, he had long noticed that something was wrong here. The villagers behaved strangely. Jiang Shangyu, who seemed to be quiet. Gu Xingyun, who was in chaos. All of this gave Li Kuangtu a feeling that was inhuman. This feeling was hard to describe. He always felt that the people here would suddenly break away from the scope of human beings at a certain moment or a certain period of time and become a form that he could not understand. He was not afraid for the time being. But as time went by, his heart had begun to become more and more uneasy. The era that belonged to them. The era of the Dark Shadow? What did the Dark Shadow mean? Li Kuangtu kept thinking in his heart and finally sighed softly. It was not the first time that regret had appeared these days, but every time it appeared, it would be suppressed by him with incomparable toughness and indifference. Jiang Shangyu was really too weird. He was also too mysterious. Since their cooperation so far, Li Kuangtu had let go of his condescension and slight contempt, and even felt that he was asking a tiger for its skin. Such a choice might be wrong. But in the current situation, it was also his only choice. His Li family, his country, his faith and persistence, and everything he had experienced did not allow him to bow to Li Tianlan. He would not do so, and it was impossible for him to do so. It's time to go. Li Kuangtu suddenly said. Yes. Jiang Shangyu nodded. He looked at Gu Xingyun and whispered, the matter of the special warfare system should be arranged as soon as possible. There was no emotion in Jiang Shangyu's voice. But at this time, Gu Xingyun suddenly felt a natural closeness in his heart. This kind of trust came from nowhere, and then it turned into sincerity. Gu Xingyun nodded. I will arrange it. The main field of the Special Warfare System is the Special Operations Bureau of various provinces in Jianghu State. In addition, there are special operations groups distributed in various provinces, as well as a large number of semi-official and semi-private special forces, and more than 20 special warfare forces, and a large number of consortiums, state-owned enterprises, and secret military enterprises that rely on the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyun paused and continued, according to the previous agreement, I can let your forces enter the Special Warfare System, and the three of us can share everything in the Special Warfare System, but it will take time. No problem. Jiang Shangyu chuckled. This kind of thing indeed needed some time to operate. The Special Warfare System of Jianghu State had never been simple. It was a behemoth involved in all aspects, and it contained far more than what Gu Xingyun had just said. In fact, in addition to what Gu Xingyun had just said, the four spirits of Jianghu State, the Terracotta Army, Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, Azura Path, Shadow Sect, and other martial arts forces with inextricable connections were also under the management of Kunlun City. Further, even a large number of special development agencies headed by the All-Heavens Force of the Wang family of Beihai were also a part of Kunlun City. There were also special warfare troops like the Snowdance Corps and even the Border Control Corps, which were under the dual management of Kunlun City and the army headquarters. This was a position at the level of a council giant. It was powerful, sensitive, and free. Its scope of authority was completely beyond everyone's imagination. However, in more than 20 years, Gu Xingyun had never really controlled the special warfare system of Jianghu state. His influence could only affect what he could influence to a certain extent.
Sai City?
Situ Tsongyue was in the invincible realm. She had a murderous weapon and stood aloof from worldly affairs. She didn't even care about Kunlun City. The terracotta army of the four spirits of Jianghu state? Gong Sun Qi, the azure dragon of Jianghu state, the head of the four spirits, could even be said to be the strongest superior of the half-step invincible realm in the dark world.
Such a person would not be too afraid of Gu Xingyun.
Moreover, the terracotta army was under the dual management of the parliament and the special warfare system.
Gu Xingyun mostly had the right to instruct.
If he interfered too much, Li Huaqing would inevitably misunderstand his thoughts about the terracotta army.
Mount Shu?
Mount Shu was a relatively easy force to control before Li Tianlan appeared. But this so-called easy control only meant that Mount Shu only superficially cooperated with some orders of Kunlun City. Mount Shu would accept the orders of Kunlun City, but whether it would be carried out or not depended entirely on its mood and whether it had enough benefits for its own side.
Jade Pool? Border Control Corps?
There was no need to say it at all.
Dongqing Wudi was born in Jade Pool.
Nominally, his Border Control Corps was also under the leadership of the Army Headquarters and Kunlun City. But with Dongqing Wudi's Border Control Corps, the other departments only had nominal leadership over it. These forces that Gu Xingyun had not really intervened in for more than 20 years almost occupied half of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. From this, it could be imagined how much power a state-protecting war god at the peak of his prestige had.
Gu Xingyun was also a state-protecting war god.
Li Honghe was also a state-protecting war god. They had the same job, but the power they could exert was completely different. And what Jiang Shangyu really wanted was more than what Gu Xingyun currently had. What he and Li Guangtu really wanted was to use Gu Xingyun's current power to touch those things that Gu Xingyun could not touch before. Now that Gu Xingyun had broken through, the three of them could be said to be the top combat force in the dark world.
Such a lineup had enough execution power.
This was also one of the key reasons why Gu Xingyun agreed to share the special warfare group with the two of them. If their plot could really be achieved, even if he could only get 1/3 of the special warfare group speaking rights, the overall strength would be much stronger than it was now.
Jiang Shangyu looked at Gu Xingyun again.
He silently recalled the resources he had now. The rise of Emperor Dong's palace was already unstoppable. At the same time, his energy was also constantly increasing in secret. The sanctuary was his ally. The remaining power of the Jiang family of South America had officially asked him for help. Although the forces that the Dark World had cooperated with this time were all destroyed in Beihai, the network and connections they left could also be used. He could also gather the remaining forces of those forces that did not go to Beihai together. Then, it was Knights Templars. Moraid's injury had begun to improve under the rules of chaos. Knights Templars had been a first-line force in the Dark World before. Integrating all these resources, the power he possessed had, to some extent, surpassed that of the Purgatory of Heaven capital that had lost East Island.
Plus Gu Xingyun's special warfare system.
Now he could be regarded as one of the most powerful people in the Dark World. And the lineup on their side seemed to be the most luxurious at present.
Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun, Moraid,
plus Wang Xiaoyao, who was neither close nor distant. In terms of experts, no matter in terms of quantity or quality, if Li Tianlan who stood at the top. Neither Emperor Dong's palace nor the Wang family of Beihai could compare with their alliance.
Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes, and his eyes flickered. Until this moment, he could really be sure.
He already had the qualification to stand in front of Li Tianlan and face the edge of the Chosen One.
Chapter 1151. Gu Xingyun was still experiencing his new power after the breakthrough. Li Guangtu was thinking about the future of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Jiang Shangyu was integrating his strength in his heart. The three of them were silent for about 2 or 3 minutes with their own thoughts.
Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled and simply said, "It's over here. We should go back to Zhongzhou State." This time, he had brought Gu Xingyun and Li Kuang to here. All his goals had been achieved. Gu Xingyun was so compatible with the rules of chaos that he was half a step stronger than he had expected. Now he only needed to adapt to his realm after the breakthrough and sort out his thoughts. There was no doubt that he was a new peak combat capability in the dark world. The purpose of bringing Li Kuang-tu here was more complicated. It was a deterrent and also meant to strengthen Li Kuang-tu's confidence. Apart from other things, the hundreds of villagers in the village whose physical qualities were close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were enough to make Li Kuang-tu know what choice he should make. Although these villagers only had physical qualities without realms, this scene was enough to make Li Kuang-tu believe that the future was promising. After the trump card of one of his bases was exposed, it could also make Li Kuang-tu take his position in the alliance seriously, and then completely stabilize the situation of their alliance. At this time, more aid was recuperating in another secret base of his. This was the foundation that he really held in his hands now. Adding everything up, Jiang Shangyu calculated again and again and felt that he was qualified to fight against Li Tianlan. Back to Zhongzhou State? Li Kuang-tu's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. He stared at Jiang Shangyu closely. Where are we now? If he remembered correctly, this should be in the hinterland of a primeval forest in Nanyun Province in Zhongzhou State. This is the Great Shadow World. Gu Xingyun smiled playfully and answered Li Kuang-tu's question. Jiang Shangyu didn't say much, but calmly said, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we should leave." He finally stood up from the grass. "Let's directly." Jiang Shangyu opened his mouth. In the next second, his entire body suddenly stiffened on the spot, and the aura that was circulating freely also abruptly stopped. Gu Xingyun, who was in the same state as him, also completely stiffened. "What's wrong?" Li Kuang-tu felt nothing. Neither Jiang Shangyu nor Gu Xingyun responded. However, in the next second, a gust of wind blew through the entire village. A sudden gust of wind blew past them with an unusually shrill and strange whistling sound. Under everyone's gaze, the forest that surrounded the village shook continuously. The pitch-black and extremely twisted trees rustled in the wind, and all the leaves pointed towards the north. The village, the forest, and everything else seemed to be completely isolated from the outside world. Vaguely, Li Kuang-tu felt like he had become a part of the village. At the moment when this feeling rose, he finally felt what Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun felt at this time. North. Hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of miles away in the north, a cold hostility and bone-piercing killing intent surged over, locking on every inch of land, every person, every living thing, and every leaf in this village. An indescribable killing intent surged between heaven and earth. Li Kuang-tu's body trembled uncontrollably. It was not fear. It was the sword energy and sword intent in his body that were almost out of control began to boil, strongly affected by the killing intent in the distance. The space was shaking slightly, twisting in a shape visible to the naked eye in front of everyone. The sky was full of killing intent. Jiang Shangyu snorted in a low voice. His voice was indescribably majestic and indifferent. The space around the village became more and more turbulent, and the sky at the edge of the forest became blurred in an instant. But the hostility, which was far away from here, did not dissipate at all. Instead, it grew stronger. It was getting closer and closer. That was an almost incredible speed and determination. "He's coming." Jiang Shangyu suddenly spoke. "Who?" Li Kuang-tu's eyes narrowed slightly. "Li Tianlan. Or King Wei." Countless strange lights flashed in Jiang Shangyu's eyes. "According to your understanding, you can call him ruthless, or 13-story building, or anything else. But I'm sure it's him. I just don't know if Li Tianlan is there." Gu Xingyun's expression kept changing. "Moving the base? It's too late." Jiang Shangyu kept thinking about the deeply buried memory, and there were countless images flashing rapidly in his pupils. His smile was cold and strange. "I can't get rid of the enemy's lock. Oh, I remember. Catastrophe. It should be on King Wei. Only half of it. No wonder, no wonder. Has Li Tianlan's hostility and killing intent, and ruthless own energy been restored to this stage?" "What are you talking about?" Li Kuang-tu's brows furrowed tightly. Jiang Shangyu gave him a serious look. "What I want to say is that it's coming." Li Kuang-tu was speechless for 2 seconds, and asked again, "What are you going to do?" He didn't understand what Jiang Shangyu was saying, and he was even suspicious of the Li Tianlan he was talking about. The fierce hostility between the heavens and the earth was too strong. It was truly overwhelming. Compared to this kind of momentum, distance was the most important thing. He didn't know how far the enemy was from here, but he had already spread his hostility here. This kind of realm was not what Li Tianlan should have at all. Even he and Ruthless couldn't do it. He had fought with Wang Tianzong and seen the state of the heavenly sun, so he was very sure of this. The enemy is a little too strong.
Not so strong. Jiang Shangyu sneered.
At this moment, he became more and more strange in Li Guangtu's eyes, and his whole person showed a kind of indescribable weirdness and gloom.
Don't be scared by this momentum. It doesn't make sense.
No matter who is in the real environment, there is a limit to the combat power they can exert. Catastrophe can directly lock us, which is some kind of space application.
Now he is still far away, but under this kind of direct lock, the distance is meaningless.
How strong he is right now is how strong you can feel him. Li Guangtu's eyes flickered, and he suddenly said, "That's also very strong."
Indeed.
Jiang Shangyu grinned.
But we are not weak either.
Since you are here, then stay here forever. He muttered to himself softly, and his smile became more and more twisted.
I just need a handy weapon. The cornerstone of the world. Is it worthy of me?
Countless memories kept surging from the deepest part of his mind.
Jiang Shangyu's eyes had been completely occupied by a strange pure black. What everyone didn't know was that,
whether it was the space-time corridor or the war god's realm, all the forces in the neutral camp had speculated about Jiang Shangyu was actually a wrong conclusion.
Jiang Shangyu had nothing. His own existence was the biggest surprise for the space-time corridor. Or perhaps it was the worst news of all. Chapter 1152. Qingzhou.
The rising sun shone through the window, bringing with it a warm feeling. On the sofa on the balcony, a beautiful woman who had just had breakfast was holding her daughter in her arms.
She was reading a story to her daughter softly.
The 1-year-old baby was lying quietly in the woman's arms, sucking her fingers gently.
Her beautiful big eyes blinked as she watched the cartoon in the storybook. Her little body twisted from time to time, looking happy and satisfied.
The door of the cloakroom was opened. He Yishui, who had been struggling inside for nearly half an hour, walked out in her pajamas.
She sighed and sat on the sofa. She gradually became a little sluggish.
She read a thin storybook to her daughter in a gentle voice and picked up another one.
She smiled and said, "It's just choosing clothes. Why are you so hesitant?"
"I don't like anything." He Yishui scratched her freshly washed hair and shook it. Then she looked at the mother and daughter on the sofa and said with a smile, "Mutong, let's go shopping."
"Ah no, we should take Xiaoxi out to play. The weather is good today. Auntie just took Xiaoxi out yesterday."
Li Mutong was a little helpless. In the end, she sold her rented house and moved in with He Yishui. This was because her good friend in front of her had directly bought the old apartment at a price 20% higher than the market price, and then openly squeezed in with the mother and daughter. The apartment was indeed not big, with an area of 1 bedroom and 1 living room. The mother and daughter usually lived a good life, but now with He Yishui and the auntie who usually took care of the child, the small apartment suddenly became extremely spacious.
He Yishui pestered Li Mutong countless times every year. Finally, Li Mutong admitted defeat and moved into the villa with her daughter. They didn't have to pay rent. It was deducted from their salary. After they moved in, their daily life became much more convenient. They went to work at the same time, which was very convenient. The only thing that made He Yishui uncomfortable was that Li Mutong was very punctual. She couldn't sleep in during working hours. The beautiful CEO was dragged to work on time by the beautiful director every day. This was He Yishui's private property.
He lived in the same villa area as his parents, so there was no need to hire a housekeeper.
When Li Mutong went to work, He Yishui's parents would take care of Li Xiaoxi.
The mother and daughter's lives seemed to have changed to another place, and then everything became stable again.
She's just a kid.
Of course she has to go out and get in touch with the outside world.
Otherwise, she'll grow up and become a shut-in.
He Yishui moved closer to Li Mutong and poked Li Xiaoxi's soft face.
"Little Xiaoxi, I'll take you out to play. How about ice cream?"
Little Tide grunted and reached out his chubby little hand to grab the storybook. Tell me the story first. Li Mutong smiled and flipped through the storybook in his hand. Her life had always been self-disciplined and disciplined. Other than the occasional gatherings with her colleagues and shopping with He Shui, there was almost no entertainment. After work, she spent all her time around her daughter, carefully planning the future of the mother and daughter, fine-tuning the direction of the future, and protecting her daughter's growth. It seemed a little sad, but she always showed a faint sense of satisfaction and happiness. He Shui sat quietly on the side, watching this scene with a smile. His eyes were soft and sincere. After Li Mutong finished the story, he gently carried his daughter down. Little Tide, who was only a little more than 1 year old, could already walk on her own. She opened her little hands, wobbled a few steps, and hugged He Shui's leg. Since you like children so much, why don't you find a boyfriend, get married, and have your own child? Li Mutong noticed the look in her friend's eyes and teased with a smile. I've given up on men a long time ago. He Shui, who had a good figure, appearance, education, and background, but had a failed marriage, said casually. He smiled and carried Li Xiaoxi up. And now I have Tide. She's your daughter, and also my goddaughter. It's the same. Tide is my biological daughter. Li Mutong wrinkled his nose. He Shui grunted, thought for 2 seconds, and secretly winked at Li Mutong. Why don't I just marry you, or marry you? I think Jianghu state now allows same-sex marriages, right? I remember I've seen similar news before. Nonsense. Li Mutong shook her head helplessly, turned back to her room and said, I'm going to change. Bas. Before she could finish speaking, an incomparably intense yet incomparably clear buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the distant sky. It sounded like the whole world was sighing. The sound rolled across the sky and seemed to spread to the whole world in an instant. The bright sunshine outside the window instantly dissipated. While they were still in a daze, colorful light suddenly shrouded the whole villa. To be exact. In other words, it covered the whole sky of Jianghu city. Li Mutong suddenly froze on the spot. In her perception, a storm suddenly appeared in the sky, which was not known how far away from Jianghu city. The storm was shuttling in the sky at an unimaginable speed. It was not hostile, but it carried indescribable majesty and grandeur. At the same time that he sensed it, the storm from an unknown distance had already approached Jianghu city. Li Mutong, who could be regarded as a master now, could not determine what the storm without any hostility or killing intent meant. The sunshine over Jianghu was completely blocked. The rainbow-colored radiance was unbridledly spreading in all directions to the west. The dazzling light shone into the villa through the window, penetrating the clouds and sprinkling on the streets. It spread evenly on every street and alley of Jianghu, dispersing all the shadows. This not very developed but lazy and leisurely city was as beautiful as a dream under the dazzling light. He Shui was a little dazed and admiring everything around her. She was quiet and lost, just like the state of all the people of Jianghu who were witnessing everything. Li Xiaoxi, who was in her arms, struggled to climb down from her long legs. He walked shakily to the floor-to-ceiling window and held the window with his small hands. Through the dazzling but not blinding light, he quietly looked at the sky outside the window. It was very different from usual. Her eyes were pure and innocent, with a little joy and a touch of calmness that seemed to belong to her but not her. The unscrupulous light swept every inch of Jianghu. Countless rays of light seemed to be forcibly pushed away from Jianghu. The sunlight sprinkled down again. This lasted for less than 5 seconds, and everyone still raised their heads subconsciously. After the light, under the sunlight above the sky, a blurry black dot seemed to be following a straight line, tearing through the sky in an extremely determined manner. It flew all the way and kept moving forward. Wherever the black dot passed, the entire space became blurry. Countless sword chi shadows had been completely stretched into extremely messy pale white lines in the high-speed flight. The lines danced wildly around the black dot, spreading out for dozens of kilometers or even longer. Everything only appeared for an instant. In the next second, the black dot directly passed through the entire sky of Yuzhou City and flew far away. Giggle! In front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the villa, Little Tide, who was watching this scene quietly, suddenly laughed. That voice had the crisp and tender voice of a child, revealing the joy from the heart. This is He Ishui shook her head hard and looked at the colorful dreamy light around her in a daze. Countless rays of light floated in the villa, mysterious and magnificent. Is this a dream? He Ishui murmured to herself. Li Mutong bit her rosy lower lip and didn't say anything. She was also unable to determine what the light that cut through the sky and the vast and chaotic lines that were as vast as the sea were. Her intuition told her that it was sword qi. But how could there be such a powerful and pure sword qi in the world? There was no fierce hostility or killing intent. It was like the purest ray of light. If it was really sword qi, then how condensed must the killing intent in the sword qi be, so that others couldn't feel it at all? The messy lines that tore through the sky instantly disappeared from the sky of Jianghu. The sunlight shone into the villa through the window again. The dreamy colorful light was still lingering, becoming more and more dazzling under the sunlight. It's even more beautiful under the sunlight. He Ishui said softly. As soon as she finished speaking, she was stunned. Li Mutong's face changed dramatically. Sunlight? The colorful rainbow just now blocked the sky, and they couldn't see the sunlight at all. Now that the sunlight had appeared again, why was the colorful light still in the villa? Giggle! The crisp sound continued to reverberate in the air. Next to the window, the little tide grabbed the railing with one hand and stretched out the other, as if it wanted to touch the sky. Outside the window, the sky was clear. The sword qi swept through Jianghu, and the few white clouds had been completely evaporated and torn apart. The sunlight shone down from the highest point. The air was cold. The villa was warm. The dreamy colorful light on the streets and alleys of Jianghu had long disappeared. Only inside the villa, the increasingly dazzling light was still quietly and obediently spreading. From Li Chaoxi's body. Li Mutong and He Ishui slowly lowered their heads, and their incredulous eyes finally fell on the little girl who was only a little more than 1 year old. The little girl was still looking at the sky outside the window. Her eyebrows were shining brightly, and strands of colorful light with indescribable vastness and purity were constantly spreading out from between her eyebrows. She was facing the sunlight outside the window, and her small body had an indescribable holiness, like a little god. The sword qi that covered the sky connected with the mighty colorful light and flew over the sky of Jianghu in an instant. Ostentatious, unrestrained, and wild, without the slightest bit of concealment. The spatial turbulence of Jianghu hadn't completely subsided, and Heartless' body had directly appeared above the sea. Like the sharpest divine weapon of this era and this world. The sword qi pierced through the sky and crossed the sea. The slightly fluctuating sea surface instantly set off a terrifying tide that was thousands of meters high. From the moment the surging tide rose up, it never fell again. The colorful light kept shining, with terrifying heat and harsh coldness, directly condensing and disintegrating the tide into a large piece of invisible sword qi. Heartless, who had fused with Worryless, was close to completion. In the real environment, although he couldn't recover quickly, he could already absorb a small part of the energy in the real environment. This might not make him stronger, but there was a great possibility that his injuries would recover because of this fusion. The colorful sword qi kept changing. High temperature, cold, thunder, storm. Wherever Heartless went, everything around him turned into sword qi. More and more virtual lines flew around him, covering the sky and covering the earth. They circled around his body and shot out. There were transparent lines, blue lines, orange lines, and pale white lines. The sword qi was endless. The tide was flying on the sea surface. Heartless rushed directly into the plane with the overwhelming sword qi. Forests, grasslands, cities, and highways moved backward crazily. This sword qi that crossed most of Jianghu state almost caused a worldwide sensation in the shortest time. Nan Yun arrived almost in a flash. Heartless rushed into the primeval forest and moved forward. The dense forest trembled wildly. As Heartless moved forward, a passage with a width of hundreds of meters appeared directly inside the forest. The black and twisted forest appeared directly in Heartless' perception. Without any pause or hesitation, the sword qi that was flying chaotically in the air suddenly lit up. Countless rays of light burst out with Heartless as the center. Without any hesitation, the sword and light that tore through the sky directly crashed into the dark and twisted primeval forest. Yuzhou! Li Tianlan, who had been thinking silently, suddenly frowned. What's wrong? Qin Weibai and Gu Xianyan sat in front of him and ate breakfast slowly. Noticing his abnormality, Qin Weibai asked. Heartless? Li Tianlong frowned slightly. I can't feel it. It ran around on its own. Did it fly far this time? Qin Weibai blinked her eyes. She had never regarded Heartless as a dead thing. Although he had no prophetic ability, it did not mean that he had no thoughts. Even most of the time, Qin Weibai regarded him as a higher creature at the same level as human beings. Li Tianlong shook his head, a little confused. There were few examples of Heartless running around, and today was the first one. With the current degree of integration between the man and the sword, under normal circumstances, no matter how far Heartless ran, even if he was on the other side of the earth, Li Tianlong could roughly feel his state. But now, the connection between him and Heartless had completely disappeared in that second. Li Tianlong silently lit a cigarette. He was a little confused. But his whole state was still surprisingly calm. In the face of this abnormal phenomenon, there was only a touch of curiosity in his heart. What did Heartless want to do? The connection between them was cut off. Was this Heartless' spontaneous will, or had he entered a special place at this moment? The phone vibrated one after another. Qin Weibai picked up the phone and looked at it. She shook her head and whispered. He has arrived in Nanyun. It's really fast. Now he seems to have become the focus of most of Jianghu state. Some pictures and videos have appeared on the internet. He really doesn't mean to hide himself at all. Li Tianlong's eyes were a little dazed, and he subconsciously whispered, he has never been a creature who knows how to hide himself. Chapter 1153. Charge. Fight. Kill. The darkness and distortion seemed to violate biology and physics. The forest that should not exist at all appeared in his perception for the first time. The light of all kinds of colors and energies suddenly lit up around Wu Qing. Hostility, fighting intent, sword energy, all of them gathered together crazily and turned into undisguised killing intent. In Wu Qing's memory, it seemed that he had never maintained such pure concentration and killing intent as he did now. His figure brought with it a dazzling flame as he shuttled back and forth at high speed, and then completely disappeared. The sword shadows all over the sky were completely boiling. At this moment, even he himself had become a killing intent. The ocean-like sword energy crashed into the forest. The space suddenly changed. The sunlight disappeared. The primeval forest that belonged to Nanyun behind him also disappeared. The cold chill completely replaced the warmth of Nanyun, and the chill spread everywhere. This kind of cold was not a drop in temperature, but close to the coldness of touching a corpse to some extent. Dead silence, strange. The chill was constantly expanding, and the surrounding space became more and more viscous in the constant chill. Darkness descended silently in the pitch-black forest. The mighty sword light shone brighter and brighter, forming countless light sources in the forest, almost lighting up the whole forest. A terrifying and powerful energy filled with extreme hostility whistled through the air. Wu Qing's figure went straight forward in the forest. The disorderly and wildly dancing virtual lines destroyed everything in the forest with a monstrous sword intent. The twisted trees were chopped into pieces and turned into floating black gas. There were incomparably shrill screams and wails everywhere between heaven and earth. The sound that came from all directions seemed real and illusory. In the end, it converged into everything, as if the entire world was moaning miserably. The huge sound wave instantly converged into a shock wave visible to the naked eye, spreading along the turbulent space. The sound wave collided with the surging sword light. The space shook violently. The whole forest came alive in an instant. Every pitch-black huge tree in the forest became more and more twisted. The sword light flew in the darkness, annihilating each other with the pitch-black sound wave. Wu Qing's figure reappeared, and more sword light lit up around him again. The sword light kept shuttling in the darkness, and there were more and more. Wu Qing's body seemed to gather an ocean of sword energy. The endless sharpness whistled in the darkness, and the constantly spreading sound wave was completely torn apart. The infinite sword energy with the sword light flew in all directions in an extremely surging manner. The black trees began to move. To be more precise, the entire dark forest seemed to have suddenly gained consciousness. It was a kind of chaotic, gloomy, tyrannical, and absolutely cold will. The temperature of the entire forest plummeted. The branches and leaves between all the huge trees started to grow at a crazy rate, and they were closely connected. The entire forest seemed to have become a single entity under the dancing sword light. Amidst the increasing number of sword lights, the black tree branches that filled every corner of Feng Xingjian's field of vision swatted down crazily, wiping out a large number of sword lights. Wu Qing still did not stop. Speed up. It kept accelerating. Light surged around him, and his entire body seemed to be burning. All the sword lights in the distance seemed to have been completely devoured by the dark forest. The chaotic and endless sword qi circled around Wu Qing, but it did not spread out in all directions. His seemingly endlessly accelerating figure paused for the first time. The acceleration came without warning. There was also no sign of a pause. His body seemed to defy the laws of physics and stopped in place. The sword light was like a dragon. It rose from his feet and shot up into the sky. The sky was completely covered by countless branches and leaves. It was pitch black. And the sky above the branches and pages was also pitch black, almost like nothingness. Wu Qing put up one hand. The ocean-like sword qi boiled again. The seemingly limitless sword qi completely surrounded his body, layer after layer. He stood in the center of the sword qi. From a distance, Wu Qing looked like a constantly circling tornado around him. The sword qi tornado expanded wildly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wu Qing stood in the eye of the storm. The sword qi tornado spread straight. Tens of meters, hundreds of meters, thousands of meters. The terrifying sword qi storm almost became spectacular in an instant. 1 second. Wu Qing kept the posture of putting up one hand. The sword lights that seemed to be spreading in all directions were actually converging. They converged with him as the center. For the time being, he still did not understand what this dark and distorted domain meant. But the world had its own rules. Whether it was light or darkness, they both had sharpness and energy. Wu Qing's fingers were slightly bent. In the dark, twisted forest, the endless sword lights vibrated at the same time. Flame, frost, thunder, storm, darkness, light, space. Everything and all the energy condensed to the extreme at the same time with Wu Qing's movements. The essence of the world was the rules. It was also energy. A spot of light that shone to the extreme directly lit up in Wu Qing's hand. His body stood in the air, and his black windbreaker fluttered unscrupulously in the cold wind. Wu Qing pointed forward with his raised palm. It was just a simple finger. Boom! An incomparably violent roar exploded in the twisted forest without any warning. It was like an overwhelming tsunami. Like a thunder rolling across the sky. Countless sword lights turned into the purest form of energy, exploding out majestically from Wu Qing's fingertips. The moment the light lit up, the pure energy had directly torn the twisted forest tens of thousands of meters in front of him. Countless dark giant trees evaporated crazily in the light, turning into a black airflow. A huge gap was directly penetrated in the twisted forest. Wu Qing was motionless, maintaining the posture of one hand forward. More and more violent energy poured out in an unreserved way with him as the center, surging in the forest. The extremely dazzling light moved forward wildly, as if someone had reached out and grabbed an ocean, pouring the huge tide directly into the forest. It was earth-shattering. The wantonly surging energy tsunami was like a torrent that could destroy everything. The twisted forest was torn apart. The extremely abundant light carried with it an absolute destructive and penetrative power as it moved forward. In 2 seconds, the twisted forest was penetrated from front to back. Wu Qing's windbreaker fluttered for a moment. He took a step forward, and his whole body appeared directly in front of the old and strange village. The huge and endless twisted forest behind him was constantly evaporating under the impact of absolute energy. The darkness began to gradually dim, turning into a black mist all over the sky. A large amount of mist and pure energy were constantly entangled. More mist began to gather toward the village. To be exact, it was gathering toward a person in the village. Jianghu sat quietly on the roof of a house in the village, looking at Wu Qing standing outside the village with a smile. His voice was slow and relaxed, without any emotion. King Wei. In your current state, can you cut my order? You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.